Chapter 101, Can I Have Your Eyes? So what if he ran? Saul didn't care about some crazy old man. He just had a feeling the lunatic was hiding something, maybe something connected to the grinding sound fruit. He walked back to Ada's house. Whenever Ada went out, he always locked Penny inside, locked her up for an entire day. She had to eat, drink, and relieve herself in there. Saul reached the door, and with a click, the lock unlatched itself. The padlock dropped right into Saul's palm. As if she'd heard the sound, the cabinet door on the wooden bed was pushed open from the inside. Saul walked into the house and saw Penny crawling out. "Brother Saul." Penny climbed out and plopped down on the edge of the bed, beaming a big smile. Saul dropped the playful grin he wore outside and sat next to Penny with a blank expression. "How did you know it was me? Can you really not see?" There was a kettle and a few green buns on the bed. None of it had been touched. The girl's lips were pale and cracked again, but she was still holding back from eating or drinking. She didn't want to relieve herself in the room anymore. "I really can't see. I recognized Brother Saul by your footsteps." "You seem to know me well." Saul turned his head to look at her. "You were only 3 when we were separated, right?" Penny was absently tugging at the hem of her clothes. It was already all frayed yarn. "Yeah, but Ada kept dreaming of Brother Saul." "Dreams, nightmare butterfly." Saul's expression shifted. He looked more intently at Penny's silvery eyes. Those eyes were strikingly beautiful from any angle. But to a regular person, alongside their beauty, there'd likely be a sense of unease. "You can see your brother's dreams. Have you always been able to?" Now it was Penny's turn to be surprised. She turned her face toward Saul and stared for a moment before giggling. "Even Ada doesn't believe me. Brother Saul, you're so nice." "Ada often dreams about the day we fled the village. He's carrying me, sometimes looking back at you trapped in the flames. Your cries for help are all around. He dreams of it all the time." "I cried for help." Saul blinked slowly, finally understanding why Ada took him in. "It was your voice, Brother Saul. I recognized it the day you came." Penny pressed her lips together, clearly proud of herself. Saul was 14 now. Probably because of past malnutrition, his voice still hadn't deepened. He'd never heard of nightmare butterflies before, but hearing Penny talk about seeing others, dreams instantly piqued his interest. He forgot all about the grinding sound fruit. "You can see in dreams." "Ma'am, I can see. In the dream I am Ada." So that's it. No wonder Penny never called Ada brother. Given the age she started dreaming, she probably couldn't tell whether she was Penny or Ada anymore. Ada said Penny lost her sight when they fled the village at age 3. That meant she'd been sharing dreams with Ada since then. It was easy to see how that could mess with her sense of identity. But there was something even more disturbing. Saul asked, "Penny, besides Ada's dreams, have you entered anyone else's dreams? Do you know those experiences are dreams?" Penny tilted her head. "At first it was only Ada's, but later I could go into other people's nearby dreams too. Like the crazy old man, he always dreams about the village being destroyed by barbarians. Or Uncle Jace, he keeps dreaming about his daughter being killed, cut into pieces. And Auntie John, she dreams about killing her husband. First beheading, then chopping up the body and hiding it in baskets of vegetables to throw out bit by bit." As for the second question, Penny didn't answer. She seemed to have forgotten it. "Do you know their dreams?" Saul asked again. Only then did Penny remember. "At first I didn't, but after dreaming so much over and over I figured it out." "Were you scared?" Penny grinned, showing her teeth. "Nope. Ada says there's no need to fear dreams. You wake up and it's over." Saul stared silently at the little girl. Even though Penny could hold a fluent conversation and had the innocence of a child, it was clear her perception of the world had become blurred by the mix of dreams and reality. She recounted those traumatic dreams, nightmares for their owners, without a flicker of emotion, as though she was used to life and death. And maybe she really was used to life and death. Penny, Saul finally said, you can see others' nightmares probably because of your eyes. If there were a chance to take those eyes away, would you be willing? The room fell silent. After a moment, Penny covered her eyes with her small hands. No. Saul stood up. Hearing the movement, Penny lifted her head, still covering her eyes. No, she repeated firmly. Saul placed his hand over hers, and black tendrils slithered out from behind his neck, slowly coiling around the girl's arms. At his command, they could tear her hands away and let him do whatever he wanted. If you steal from children, you'll turn into a puppy, Penny warned. Saul slowly withdrew his hand, and little Algie reluctantly pulled back its tendrils. Those eyes are dangerous to you. I hope you'll change your mind one day. Penny heard his footsteps heading toward the door, then the sound of him stepping over the threshold. Brother Saul, where are you going? She asked anxiously, as if she'd forgotten he'd just tried to take her eyes. Out to find work. Then came the sound of the main door closing and locking. Penny sat frozen, wondering if Brother Saul was angry. His voice was harder to read than Ada's. She touched her eyes. She just thought, if all she had left were two empty holes, wouldn't she be ugly? Before long, she started feeling bored again. If Brother Saul would play with her more often, then even if her eyes turned into black holes, that would be fine. Her hand brushed the kettle beside her. She was clearly thirsty but didn't want a drink. She just pouted and pushed the kettle farther away. She didn't know how long had passed when someone knocked on the window frame outside. Little Penny Tilda, Uncle Jace's voice called. Penny crawled back into the cabinet, pressed her face to the window and said, Ada said I'm not allowed to talk to you. Don't listen to that idiot brother of yours. Penny also thinks Ada's an idiot. Saul wandered around Grindsale town once more and basically pieced together the relationships between the holy fruit and the nurturing mothers. The grinding sound fruit was probably like the companion flower of a wizard tower, fond of feeding on the aura of the dead. Except this fruit seemed to prefer the scent of young maidens. He recalled a senior named Peggy who once, in order to lure an wraith toward Saul, had made a sensory-confusing mask using a piece of her tender thigh. Did the grinding sound fruit and wraith share the same taste? While wandering, Saul snuck near the open plot where the grinding sound fruit grew again. It was still heavily guarded by the town's strongest, but there was no sign of the girls taken that morning. So the nourishing process didn't have to happen in the fields. But then he noticed something. The old three-story tower that had been tightly sealed the night before now had its door cracked open. The small tower was a wood-stone hybrid structure, looking ancient and ready to collapse, yet somehow also giving off an air of permanence and indestructibility. There were no guards around it. The half-open door seemed like an invitation to someone. Saul instinctively glanced at the diary. The diary ignored him. But little Algie came out and nuzzled his face. Are there any spirits in there? Little Algie waved its tendrils back and forth. Saul patted its tip and sent it back. Little Algie was always more obedient than the diary, vanishing in a flash. Saul waited until it was nearly dark before returning to Ada's courtyard. But the moment he got close, he heard a huge crash from inside, followed by Ada's furious shouting. I told you to stay away from her. Saul pushed through the gate and found the yard in chaos. A few clotheslines had fallen, with clothes and shoes scattered all over. A bunch of random items in the yard had been knocked over. A woman peeked from behind a window. The moment she met Saul's gaze, she vanished. At the center of the mess stood Ada, red-faced and gasping with rage. On the ground lay Jace, still grinning despite being knocked down. and the front door of Ada's house was wide open. The lock that usually hung on it had been bent and broken, half on the ground, half dangling uselessly on the door. Chapter 102. Your dream, it's so scary. What are you so tense about? I just thought Penny looked bored all alone, so I wanted to take her out for a stroll. Liar, if I hadn't come back early, you would have already run off with her. The more Ada thought about it, the more frightened he felt. He raised his fists again and charged. Jace scrambled up from the ground and dodged twice, but on the third try, he caught Ada's fist with one hand. All right, if you keep swinging, I'll start hitting back. Jace's tone turned cocky again, but then he caught a glimpse of a small, slender finger peeking out from the window, and his expression lost some of its arrogance. You can't keep hiding Penny forever. Jace adjusted his collar, then pushed Ada back with one strong shove. Ada stumbled back a few steps and hit the door with a loud clang. He was trembling with rage, his fists clenched so tight the knuckles turned white. Jace ignored him. He knew Ada wouldn't really fight, because Ada couldn't beat him. As he passed by Saul this time, he turned and gave him a mocking smile. Well, found yourself a job. Saul said nothing, and Jace pointed his thumb back at Ada. You might as well let Ada feed you. He's already brain dead. After Jace left, Saul walked over to Ada. Are you all right? I'm fine, Ada snapped. He stood there silently for a while, then turned and went out into the yard to clean up the mess. Saul didn't help. Instead, he went inside to check on Penny. Penny was surprisingly standing on the ground, her expression a little lost. The star-like silver glow in her eyes had dimmed. Brother Saul, she said as she heard him approach, again calling his name with eerie accuracy. Why can't I go outside? Out there, Saul clicked his tongue. It's a mess. Oh, Penny's voice dropped. She walked back to the bed, opened the cabinet door, and crawled inside. A little while later, Ada returned to the house after finishing the cleanup. Seeing the cabinet door shut, he walked over and whispered something. Then he approached Saul. You can stay here 3 more days. After that, you'll have to go. I remember there's some work in town that includes room and board. It's tough, but if you really can't take it, go find something somewhere else. Perhaps Saul's idle attitude and cold detachment these past few days had finally crossed Ada's bottom line. He was now giving Saul a deadline. All right, Saul nodded, jumped onto the table, and lay down with his back to Ada. The room fell silent, the only sound being Ada's long sigh. That night, Saul actually dozed off for a bit. And this time, he was keenly aware that he was dreaming. In the dream, he had returned to the mortuary, lying on the conveyor belt. The hundreds of corpses he had processed were now standing around him. One corpse, its head split in two, held a cleaver aimed directly at Saul's skull. Another was a pile of meat chunks stacked like blocks, balancing a hammer on top, ready to topple. Saul. Someone was calling him. Saul pushed away the corpses trying to dismember him and sat up on the conveyor belt. The corpses collapsed like dominoes. Beyond them stood Gorsa, wrapped head to toe in pink bandages. Even knowing it was a dream, Saul showed respect to the Tower Master. Tower Master. With an eerie motion, Gorsa slowly raised both hands and began unwrapping his bandages from the top of his head down. And underneath, there was nothing. Saul's mouth slowly fell open, astonished by what his subconscious seemed to be revealing about the Tower Master's true form. Was this what they called the subconscious? When the bandages reached the eyes, 2 silver eyeballs dropped to the ground. Gorsa's mouth was still moving. Saul, do you know why I had you study souls? All at once the bandages collapsed without support, landing in a heap, but his voice continued. You tell me, does just having a soul count as being alive? The corpses crowded back in, mouthless or not, all making noise. Just a soul, is that enough to live? Brother Saul, a little girl's panicked, tearful voice called out. What is it, Penny? Saul jerked awake. In the dark, he couldn't see her face, but her hand was clutching his clothes, trembling. Brother Saul, don't go back to sleep. Your dream, it was really scary. Had Penny been in his dream too? Saul hadn't noticed at all. He rubbed his drowsy forehead, gently patted her hand, and whispered, All right. Brother Saul won't sleep. Don't be scared, Penny. Dreams aren't real, go back to sleep. While she was still dazed, Saul cast a minor healing spell and a resistance boost on her. Those were the only two beneficial spells he currently knew. There was no choice. If Penny kept getting dragged into his dreams, going mad might be the least of her problems. After being comforted, Penny seemed much more at ease. She cheerfully crawled back into the cabinet to sleep. But Saul couldn't fall asleep again. In his 2 years at the tower, he rarely had dreams, let alone meaningless ones. So why was he dreaming like this here, in Grindsail Town? Saul pondered as he half-closed his eyes and slipped into meditation for the rest of the night. Only that night, for many, was a sleepless one. On the northern outskirts of Grindsail Town, from the tower that stood beside the murmuring fruit fields, came a loud bang. The guards stationed by the grinding sound fruits all lowered their heads, not daring to look. Inside the decrepit tower, a middle-aged man stood stark naked within a magical array at the top floor. Not a single hair on his body. Outside the array lay the corpse of a woman he had just thrown out. The girl who had been taken away that morning now lay in a corner, limbs severed. Her eyes were wide open, blood trickling from the corners, clearly unwilling to die. The first-rank apprentice stood within the array, jaw twitching, his expression twisted. His chest heaved violently, and it was half an hour before he finally stepped out and took a black robe from a shelf to dress himself. Rupert, he called, voice low and cold with rage. Though quiet, the sound reached its intended target. Grindsail Town's mayor, waiting nervously outside, took a deep breath before pushing open the door with trembling hands and climbing the spiral staircase to the 3rd floor. Lord Shelley. Rupert's face twitched as he saw the corpse, quickly pushing down any reaction and bowing deeply to the first-rank apprentice. The ascension failed this time. Shelley's voice still held a trace of resentment. But I'm just a hair away from becoming a 2nd-rank apprentice. Go find me another suitable girl. Immediately. Another girl? Rupert hesitated. We've already taken so many. The townsfolk are getting restless. When Lord Yucca returns, won't he grow suspicious? Shelley glared, silencing him. Once I'm 2nd rank, why would I care what he thinks? Yes, yes, sweat beaded on Rupert's forehead. Oh, and bring me 2, no, 5 grinding sound fruits. Rupert flinched. Though just warned, he couldn't help but protest. But those barbarians will be arriving in a couple days. And next month, the tower's people come to collect their share. We don't have much left. Shelley dismissed his concern. We can't wait. Yucca will be back the day after tomorrow. If he finds out what we're doing, he'll definitely stop us. I'm this close. I must ascend before then. He waved a hand, his tone softening slightly. Once I'm 2nd rank, I'll have the power to confront those barbarians. Wasn't that the point of all this? To stop their endless plundering. Hearing this, Rupert's eyes grew determined. All right, I'll have someone fetch the grinding sound fruits. He sent the message and sighed. The tower took our tribute, but refused to help us wipe out the barbarians. We've been forced to do shady deals with them just to survive. Then, glancing cautiously at Shelley, he lowered his voice. But I still don't get it. Why do those barbarians want the grinding sound fruits instead of meat? Chapter 103. Grindsail Town Plot, The Necessary Resolve. Shelley recalled the barbarian priest he had met a few times in the past. The way the man oscillated between madness and lucidity had left even him, a wizard apprentice, secretly alarmed. Perhaps the priest's sanity was already on the verge of collapse, and that's why he wanted to use grinding sound fruit to stabilize himself. You don't need to know about that. Matters of the wizarding world, you're just a regular person. The more you know, the quicker you die. Why, yes. Though his curiosity remained unsatisfied, Rupert didn't dare press further. Just then, a soldier arrived with 5 grinding sound fruits. Shelley told him to leave the fruits on the floor, waved his hand, and sent him away. As Mayor Rupert was leaving, he heard Shelley urgently calling out again. "Hurry and find a girl, a clean one, bring her here before morning." "Why, yes," Rupert bowed repeatedly and reached to shut the door. As he turned back, he saw the soldier who had delivered the fruit standing stiffly at the stairway, head bowed low, eyes fixed firmly on his toes, not daring to look around. Soldiers assigned to this place were all Rupert's trusted men. He walked over and patted the soldier's shoulder. "It's nothing, the place just looks scary, you'll get used to it." The soldier forced a grim, ugly smile. He had also helped with the tower's renovation, tearing out the floors of the first and second levels, and leaving only a wooden staircase spiraling down along the tower's interior wall. The two of them descended the stairs one after the other. On the surrounding walls were paintings of grotesque, twisted faces. If the soldier had the courage to look closely, he might have recognized some familiar features among those faces. Though Rupert told the soldier not to be afraid, he himself dared not glance at the walls while descending. He always felt that if he stared too long, something terrible would happen. And while the first-rank wizard apprentice in Grind Sail Town was desperately seeking a breakthrough to escape the looming threat of barbarian raids, the very barbarians they feared welcomed an unexpected visitor that night. This band of barbarians, wandering the border between the Kema and Kinas, were fast asleep. Some leaned against rocks, others lay directly on the ground. No one lit a campfire, no one stood watch. What if they were attacked in the night? Then they'd simply get up and fight. At the center of the encampment stood a crookedly assembled tent. Around the tent, several corpses were impaled on wooden stakes and nailed to the ground. Each body had been crudely hacked in half, one facing up, the other down, impaled together on a single stake. It was their unique form of ritual sacrifice. Suddenly, a pair of feet landed silently outside the tent, yet none of the sleeping barbarians stirred at the sound. The figure gradually emerged from the darkness, frowning in disgust as he looked around at the staked corpses. Then, stepping between the bisected bodies, he lifted the tent flap and entered. Inside, the barbarian chieftain sat cross-legged in meditation. He snapped open his eyes and assumed a defensive posture. But when he saw who it was, he froze, then slowly sat back down. "You are earlier than agreed. I don't have the fruit yet." The barbarian priest spoke the common tongue slowly and haltingly. The visitor looked down on him without responding, his voice stiff and cold. "Kema's wizard Kiera has advanced to second rank. She plans to personally purge the borderlands of barbarians. You're on her list." The barbarian priest's face was painted with alternating red and black symbols, masking his expression. But the twitching muscles around his mouth revealed his unrest. "Second-rank wizard, we must leave," he said. Among the barbarians, he was one of the few who still retained a shred of rationality. "Migration requires food." The priest looked up at the wizard. "You'll have to figure that out yourselves." The wizard sneered and turned to leave. After a few steps, he paused. "Oh right, wipe out Grind Sail Town." The priest looked up in confusion. "Your wizard tower doesn't want the fruit." The wizard half turned his head, voice frosty. "Just do it." The priest acted as if he didn't hear the threat, merely stating, "Yes, Lord Bill." "HMPH, trying to threaten me. Wizard Bill snorted and exited the tent. Once he was gone, the barbarian priest slowly pushed himself up with one hand. He picked up the wooden staff leaning beside him and bit his finger, smearing the blood on the top of the staff. The staff already bore several blood marks, each one clear and vivid. "The chieftain walks with us." He tapped the ground once with the staff, and an invisible ripple spread outward. Outside the tent, the previously sound asleep barbarians shook their heads and began to rise. The priest stepped out of the tent, raised both arms, and held the staff horizontally above his head. Migration. Roar. Slaughter. Roar. Roar, roar. If the first command had drawn a simple response, the second one stirred an explosive enthusiasm. Seeing the barbarians full of energy and eager for blood, the priest nodded in satisfaction. He looked around, taking a moment to determine the direction. Grindsail Town, this time leave none alive. Roar. Roar. Roar, roar. Around 5 a.m. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the surroundings still dim. Inside the room, Saul stirred from his meditation, sensing someone approaching, and opened his eyes. At the same time, the front gate of the small courtyard was pounded with brutal force. No matter which room one was sleeping in, waking up and walking to the gate would take a bit of time. But whoever was outside clearly had no patience to wait. Bang, bang, bang. With a loud crash, the gate was knocked down. Ada, rubbing his eyes, had just gotten out of bed. "Who the hell's banging so early? Damn the door." He rushed out of the cabin in disbelief, only to see a group of men flooding into the yard, heading straight for his house. At the front was Jeff, captain of the town's guards. Countless terrifying memories flashed through Ada's mind in an instant, but his heart resisted the obvious answer. Penny was so young. How could she be chosen as a grinding sound fruit foster mother? She was blind too, not the image of a pure, beautiful girl at all. Maybe it's for some other reason. Maybe they're here for me, Ada prayed to himself. But things always move toward the worst possible outcome. Captain Jeff walked up to Ada, looking at the half-grown boy's face, which was full of confusion and fear. A flicker of guilt flashed across his mind. But his expression remained cold. He opened his mouth and said the cruelest words with icy calm. "Ada, your sister Penny has been chosen to be the sacrifice for the grinding sound fruit. We're here to take her." Saul, still seated at the table, frowned and looked toward the large cabinet by the bed. The cabinet door slowly creaked open, revealing Penny's small, bewildered face. Outside, Ada couldn't believe what he was hearing. He walked over and grabbed Jeff's arm. "Captain Jeff, just yesterday, didn't you already choose someone? Why are you taking Penny today?" He clung to any excuse that might get her out of it. "She's blind, only 7, too young. Aren't there other girls in town?" Jeff remained silent. Could he say that the town couldn't find even a single suitable girl? So under the mayor's strict orders, he thought of Penny, the pitiful girl who rarely left her house. Only Ada still naively believed that Penny's blindness would protect her from being chosen. How could he know that the wizards didn't care about appearances at all? "Ada," Jeff said in a low voice, "you've lived in this town for 4 years now. In those 4 years, we've fed and sheltered you, kept you safe from disaster and vagrancy. Now it's time for you to give something back. The grinding sound fruit's yield is plummeting. We have no choice but to sacrifice another. I hope you understand, and don't make me use force." Chapter 104. Grindsail Town Arc. I hope Ada can be happy. The commotion had already alarmed the neighbors. Some of them didn't even have time to get fully dressed before rushing to the courtyard gate to see what was happening. Inside the room, Penny had already climbed off the bed, slowly shuffling her small feet until she reached Saul's side. Unlike her brother, her face showed none of the despair he wore. She reached out and touched Saul's knee, giving his leg a gentle shake. "Brother Saul, I'm here. Are they going to take Penny away?" "Yes, and your brother probably won't be able to stop them." "Then, Brother Saul," Penny looked up at him with her little face, surprisingly calm, "if they take me away, does that mean Penny going to die?" "More or less, are you afraid?" "Actually, dying isn't such a scary thing, Brother Saul." "Hello? If Penny going to die anyway, then these eyes won't be needed anymore. You can have them, Brother Saul." Saul looked at Penny and couldn't help but chuckle softly. He reached out and ruffled her hair. "I don't take things from others for free, Penny. So tell me, do you have any wishes?" Penny innocently touched the top of her head. This was the first time anyone had ever ruffled her hair. "I hope," she said without much hesitation, "I hope Ada can live a little happier from now on." Saul was momentarily stunned. He'd expected her to say something like, "I don't want to die." "Got it," Saul said softly. "Now tilt your head up and open your eyes wide. It'll sting just a little." Outside the house, Ada was still making his final stand, while Captain Jeff had yet to resort to violence. Over the years, this had always been Jeff's way. Rather than forcefully taking the girls, it was better to pressure the family under the watchful eyes of the townspeople until they gave up willingly. That way, when they lay awake at night, they could still comfort themselves with the thought that they had sacrificed their children for the greater good of the town. And sure enough, people had begun to persuade Ada. The reasons were nothing new. The town took you in. You can live a peaceful life here. One must not forget kindness, and so on. Aunt Jenny, who was always eager to gossip, appeared at the gate. She walked slowly into the yard, and her first words completely broke down Ada's resolve. "Ada, just let Captain Jeff take Penny. You've been in Grind Sale Town for so many years and never showed any sign of leaving with her. Wasn't that because you were already prepared for the day she'd be taken away?" Ada, who had just been standing strong, looked up in disbelief. "Aunt Jenny." Jenny chuckled lightly. "If that weren't the case, you should have left long ago. You were just clinging to the safety and comfort of Grind Sale Town, weren't you? And when faced with that kind of life, risking your sister a little, that was something you could accept, wasn't it?" Ada's shoulders slumped all at once, and he shook his head in despair. "No, that's not it, it's not." Captain Jeff glanced up at the sky. This Ada was proving to be unexpectedly difficult, and today neither the wizard nor the mayor could come. He motioned with his hand, and the soldiers behind him rushed forward, deciding to seize the girl by force. Over the years, they had run into stubborn types before. If time was short, they could just grab the girl first and smooth things over later. When Ada saw the soldiers charging, he ran to the doorway and braced himself in the frame with both arms and legs. "No, I won't let you take Penny." The soldiers didn't care about a defenseless boy and were about to break through with brute force. But then a figure suddenly darted between Ada and the soldiers. It was Jace. He held a long blade in his hand, one identical to the one Captain Jeff wore at his hip. "Hey, Ada, you think you can save Penny like that? At a moment like this, someone like me who's willing to pick up a weapon is what you need." Jace, Ada couldn't believe it. At this most critical moment, the one standing up for Penny was the very person he had always looked down on and been wary of, Jace. Seeing Jace appear, Captain Jeff finally stepped forward. "Jace, this isn't your concern." Jeff also drew his blade. "It absolutely is. Hate to break it to you, but Penny is already my daughter. She calls me father, so naturally I'll protect her." Jeff's expression darkened slightly. The onlookers in the yard began to back away. They realized that a fight was about to break out. "You lot get Penny out of there. I'll deal with Jace," Jeff barked. Jace knew Ada wouldn't be able to hold off the soldiers. While keeping an eye on Jeff, he also had to bear most of the pressure to help Ada. but having been out of the military for so many years, he wasn't sure he could handle so many opponents. It looked like a bloody clash was inevitable. Ada Jace. Brother, father. A hoarse voice called out from behind them. Both men froze and turned toward the house. Penny was slowly feeling her way outside. Her eyes, usually wide open, were tightly shut. Saul still sat on the table inside, watching everything unfold with an emotionless face. "Penny, get back inside," Ada shouted. "Ada, take Penny and run. I'll hold them off," Jace said, still trying to buy time. "Brother, father, don't fight anymore. Just let them take Penny. Penny's not afraid of dying." Ada looked at her in disbelief. "Why Penny?" Jace snorted coldly. "She's just a child. Don't take her words too seriously." And with that, he charged forward with his blade. The soldiers hadn't expected him to attack so suddenly and had to dodge first. At the same time, Jeff arrived. He slashed down, narrowly missing Jace's shoulder. Luckily, Jace changed his move in the nick of time, raising his blade horizontally to block, avoiding a bloody injury. But he could feel it. After all these years without fighting, he was no longer the warrior he once was. The moment he picked up the blade, he realized he'd grown old. Ada picked up Penny, intending to dash out of the courtyard, but the gate was already packed tight with townspeople. Even when they saw Ada carrying Penny toward them, no one moved aside. He tried to push through them, but there was no way he could overcome the strength of so many people alone. He was quickly pinned down by the pursuing soldiers, and Penny was snatched from his arms. This time, the townspeople immediately cleared a path. A few soldiers dragged Penny and began heading out. Just then Penny, who had been silent, suddenly turned her head and shouted, "Ada, Brother Saul promised me. He said he'd make sure you're happy in the future." As soon as she said it, she was taken out of Ada's sight. "Penny!" Ada was still being held down, unable to move. Jace, meanwhile, had been struck down by Jeff and several soldiers. Jeff didn't go for a killing blow, just left a long, thin cut across Jace's chest. "Jace, what you did today crossed the line for Grindsail Town. You've got 3 days to leave," Jeff said, then added, "or if you're willing to change and come back to serve in the Guard, I can still let this go." Jace just clutched his wound and slowly got to his feet, not responding to Jeff's offer. Jeff shook his head and left with his men. After the soldiers withdrew, some neighbors wanted to approach Ada and offer comfort, but when they saw his bloodshot eyes glaring at them with such fury, one by one, they shook their heads and backed away. And as if to preserve their dignity, they murmured, "Let's wait until he calms down." Chapter 105, Grindsail Town Arc. I'm from the Wizard Tower. The courtyard finally quieted down. Even Jace had gone back to dress his wounds. No one else in the other rooms had come out the entire time. Ada silently got up from the ground and limped back to his room. He glanced at Saul, who was still sitting on the table. His mouth opened like he wanted to curse him out, but in the end he only said coldly, "Leave. Now." Saul didn't say anything. He just nodded and got down from the table. As soon as he stepped out of the cabin, the door slammed shut behind him. Saul adjusted the gear on his body, then walked away with a spring in his step. Just then, someone suddenly appeared at the entrance. It was the old madman who had vanished for a whole day. He clutched the broken doorframe with both hands, summoning all the courage he had, and said to Saul, "Why, you'll go save Penny, right?" Saul turned his head to look at him. "So you weren't really mad after all. That day, you were just pretending to be asleep, weren't you?" The old madman trembled all over, his beard, clumped with dirt and wood chips, shedding bit by bit. But he still gathered his courage and raised his head. "Yes, sir. You're a wizard too, aren't you? Could you please save little Penny? She really is such a pitiful, kind child. I've got a general sense of what's going on in Grindsail Town. Can you tell me more about these barbarians and the evil spirits you mentioned? This time the old man didn't hesitate. Sadness filled his eyes. All right, I'll tell you everything I know. But Saul hooked the old man's arm and said, "Tell me on the way. I'm in a bit of a rush." After Saul and the old man left, Ada locked himself in the room and ignored everyone. Suddenly, the door was kicked open. Jace, freshly bandaged, stormed in. "Hey, Ada, you're giving up just like that." Ada was curled up on the wooden bed, tightly clutching the bowl Penny usually used for meals. He lifted his head blankly and said to Jace, "Jace, thank you. I misunderstood you the other day." "Why are you saying that now?" Jace slapped the bed. "From what I've seen over the years before the ritual starts, Penny should be held in a separate place. Are you coming with me to steal her back while we have the chance?" What? Penny felt herself being taken somewhere high up, then thrown to the ground. Maybe because she was young and blind, the people who brought her didn't bother restraining her. Penny groped around on the ground with her hands and felt something slightly sticky. It made her uncomfortable. There was no wall nearby she could touch, so she simply hugged her knees and curled up into a sitting position. She wasn't especially scared. In all her years of dreams, she had seen people die in her arms, seen herself chop others down, and even seen herself stab a knife into her own throat. So to her, death was a very ordinary thing, not worth fearing. She only worried about Ada living alone from now on. Would he be able to get used to it? And Saul must be a wizard too. His dreams were so strange, so terrifying. Such a powerful wizard must be able to grant her wish, right? Penny lifted a hand and touched her eyelid. It still hurt a little when she pressed her eyes, but just a little. Saul didn't dig out her entire eyeball, but he definitely took something from her eye. Yet when she touched her eyelid, there wasn't a hole. She felt oddly relieved. Just then, footsteps interrupted her thoughts. She tilted her head, hearing one set of unhappy steps and another filled with anxiety. The owner of the angry footsteps approached and grabbed her chin, then quickly let go. She heard him shouting in frustration, "Why, you bring back this useless thing?" Penny didn't understand what he meant. She just thought, if this was the Wizard of Grind Sale Town, he didn't feel even half as impressive as Saul. The other person explained, "Girls in town are running low. She was the quickest one I could get. Then go search outside, check the surrounding villages. Tell them if they offer up a pure girl, their whole family can move into Grind Sale Town." "All right, I'll send Jeff now. What about this girl?" Penny felt that icy, sinister gaze return to her face. The grumpy voice replied, "Since she's here, I'll make do with her for now." Penny shrank slightly. That word felt more terrifying than death. "Enough, I'm starting now. Go wait outside." "Now, all right." The second set of footsteps left. Only the two of them remained in the room. Penny suddenly shivered. Then came the sound of someone undressing. The grumpy wizard approached again. Penny blankly turned her face toward him, her eyes still shut. "You don't seem too scared." Penny shook her head. "That's no good. I want a more terrified soul." "How can I make you more afraid? Maybe by breaking your arms and legs." Cold hands pressed against Penny's shoulders, but her expression didn't change much. So unexpectedly calm. "Are you a fool? Maybe I'll peel your skin off first." Penny flinched a little, but even then the fear she showed was minimal. This time the man fell silent for a moment. Then suddenly Penny felt lips close to her ear, but the breath was icy cold. "You're not afraid of death anymore. Then I bet you've got family in town, someone who takes care of you, right? I'll have them brought here and I'll kill them in front of you one by one. How's that sound?" Penny's head shot up. Her breath turned rapid, anxiety and panic pouring from her in full. The man, satisfied, said, "So you only care about the people around you. Not bad. Once they're all dead, I bet your emotions will be even more delicious." His unhappy footsteps retreated. Penny scrambled to grab him but caught nothing. Ugh! She gave a short scream, but didn't know what to say to protect Ada. Just then, another voice rang out. And before it did, Penny hadn't heard a single footstep. But she recognized that voice. It was Saul. "You're trying to amplify your magic power by harvesting the resentment of tortured souls. Speaking from experience, I'm afraid I have to tell you, it's really not that effective." What? Saul canceled his invisibility and stepped out from the corner of the room. "Who are you?" First-rank apprentice Shelley exclaimed in surprise, then immediately cast a shock bolt. His casting speed was impressive. Clearly, it was a spell he'd practiced countless times. But when the bolt hit Saul, Saul instantly vanished. An illusion. Shelley realized too late he'd fallen for a spell. He looked around and saw a boy who looked exactly like the first one appear beside Penny. This time he didn't attack recklessly. Instead, he backed away a few steps and moved toward the clothes he'd thrown to the ground. "I don't know what you're talking about. Grindsail Town is under the protection of the Gorsa Wizard Tower. If you don't want to make enemies—" He didn't finish his sentence before Saul flicked his wrist, and something thin flew through the air. Shelley instinctively thought it was an attack and dove hard to the left. Saul helped Penny to her feet, then squinted at the sight of a naked, hairless man pulling off evasive stunts. It was an eyesore. "I'm from the Gorsa Wizard Tower." Saul pointed at the document Shelley had dodged, now lying on the floor. "See for yourself." Chapter 106. Grindsail Town Arc. A bowl can't hold a bucket of water. Shelley scrambled to his feet in a panic, his eyes wide in disbelief. "You're from the Wizard Tower." Saul knew he looked a bit too young to be convincing, but he didn't bother explaining. Instead, he used Mage Hand to lift the letter from the floor and send it directly and accurately into Shelley's hands. "Hold on to it this time." Saul's smile vanished, his voice dropping by an octave. "Drop it again and I'll twist your head off with it." Shelley instinctively clutched the letter tightly. He looked down and quickly confirmed that it was indeed a handwritten letter from the Wizard Tower. While Shelley was occupied reading the letter, Saul leaned close and whispered to Penny, "I've thought about it. If we want Ada to be happy in the future, it's best if you stay by his side." Penny lifted her head, her eyes instinctively widening. Inside them was no longer the silver starlight, only a dull gray mist. Saul had taken away her eyes, along with her ability to see the world through dreams. For an ordinary person, that might not be a bad thing. "Wait here for a bit, Penny. Once I'm done, I'll take you back." Penny nodded. She reached out her hands, felt Saul's robe, and followed it down to the hem, where she held on tightly. Saul kept part of his attention on Shelley across the room. Though the man was still reading the letter from Mentor Rum, he could strike at any moment. And Saul wasn't sure if the Wizard Tower's authority was enough to deter someone who hadn't even completed the basic apprentice training. After all, ignorance breeds fearlessness. Just look at what this wild first-rank apprentice was trying to do. He was attempting to refine vengeful spirits to enhance his own magical power. What did he think he was still too sane, that his brain hadn't rotted quite enough? Across the room, Shelley finally finished reading the letter, his face shifting between pale and flushed. The letter was short. Saul had read it too, just a scolding really. The general message was that Grindsail Town's tribute to the Wizard Tower was dispensable. If they didn't take it seriously themselves, then there'd be no need to continue sending anything at all. But the tone was much colder and more arrogant than how mentors usually scolded apprentices. Still, Saul didn't believe the Wizard Tower was truly indifferent about the grinding sound fruit. Otherwise, they could have just cut ties altogether. Why bother sending a reprimand and asking him to investigate the drop in output? In the past 2 years, Saul had never even heard of grinding sound fruit as a material. He didn't know what it was used for. Clearly, Shelley was shaken by the letter. When he finally set it down, his face was twitching uncontrollably. "My lord," Shelley said, struggling to contain a swirl of emotions as he bowed to the boy who looked younger than his own son, "please allow me to change into proper clothes. It's inappropriate to greet you like this." "No need. I don't care for those troublesome formalities." Saul's words stopped Shelley mid-step, just as he was about to head for his clothes. Shelley looked back at him in disbelief, as if he wanted to say more. But Saul cut him off. "I don't know where you learned this method of creating vengeful spirits, but it won't help you reach second rank." On the way here, Saul had listened to the old madman's story and realized the town leader seemed to be dealing with the barbarians. The barbarians, shamans, had unique methods to refine vengeful spirits using ordinary people. That led Saul to suspect this first-rank apprentice might be trying to use the barbarians' method to advance to second rank. He had chosen not to act sooner precisely, so he could observe firsthand what the people of this town were up to. All the investigation in the world couldn't compare to seeing it with his own eyes. Looking at Shelley, his body pale and bloated like a waterlogged corpse, Saul knew the man had probably been using vengeful spirit to empower himself for over a year now. Even if Saul didn't know the exact process, he could infer from the principles. One inevitable side effect of absorbing too many vengeful spirits was the chaos of being overwhelmed by their consciousnesses. It meant living in a constant nightmare. Fear, despair, madness, collapse. Without proper methods to deal with it, that was Shelley's inevitable fate. With that in mind, Saul also guessed one possible reason for the grinding sound fruit's reduced yield. Grinding sound fruit, approximately tranquilizer. Shelley was likely using grinding sound fruit to stabilize his fractured mental construct. But that only suppressed the symptoms temporarily. Eventually, it would all come crashing down even harder. Shelley's face showed some surprise at Saul's words, but Saul could tell from the flicker in his eyes that he wasn't taking them to heart. Just the kind of person who believes, "You don't understand. This is a secret family remedy." "What's your name?" Saul suddenly asked. "I'm Shelley, my lord." His hands flailed awkwardly, unsure where to rest. When alone, or when he held absolute power, he delighted in the primal sensation of being unclothed and unconcerned. But under scrutiny, under pressure, his nakedness felt like that of a lamb in a slaughter pen, already sheared bare. Saul noticed his discomfort. But he couldn't allow an enemy to armor up. Who knew what kind of weird tools Shelley might have hidden in his clothes? "I remember you had a companion," Saul asked casually, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "Yes, my lord. His name is Yuka, also a first-rank apprentice." "Did you two cultivate the grinding sound fruit together?" "Yes. I handled most of the cultivation. Yuka is more skilled in combat, so can't kill one and spare the other." Saul made up his mind. "Do you know the requirements for advancing to second rank?" he asked, tapping his toe lightly on the ground. Shelley blinked, confused by the sudden topic shift. He hesitated, then answered. "At least 45 joules of magic power and successfully constructing a first-tier spell." "What's your current magic power?" 44 joules, my lord." No wonder he was already hunting for another girl. He must be desperate to break through that final barrier. "If I'm not wrong, before you killed that girl yesterday, your magic power was already close to 45 joules, wasn't it?" Saul's toe drew idle patterns on the floor. Because of the ultra-sensitive penny nearby, Saul avoided using words like refine or extract. "Yes, my lord." "Even if I hadn't shown up today, you wouldn't have been able to reach 45 joules with her." Shelley looked at him again, that same skeptical expression. Your mental construct is too loose. It can't contain the magic you're accumulating. The vengeful spirits you create from ordinary people are extremely fragile, and you don't have the power to stabilize them. So even when you hit the threshold, it all just leaks away. Wild apprentices like Shelley received fragmented and incomplete training. But, Shelley seemed to be getting it, but reflexively refused to believe. To put it in words you'll understand, a bowl can't hold a bucket of water. That was too blunt. Shelley was stunned. Saul had also hit bottlenecks in his magic growth, but unlike Shelley, his limitation came from magical aptitude, not from a cap on his mental structure. Shelley's situation wasn't hopeless, but Saul wasn't about to hand him a solution. I think you already understand what you need to do next. What I don't get is, if you already pledged yourself to the Wizard Tower, why start making deals with the barbarians? Saul stepped forward hard, startling Shelley. Shelley finally raised his head, a twisted smile on his face, one worse than crying. Because all you people ever do is take the grinding sound fruit. You won't do anything else for us. He suddenly hugged his own arms tightly, his fingers digging into his flesh and dragging downward in a brutal motion. Blood sprayed out instantly, and from the wounds drifted the pale gray faces of young girls. They floated up from Shelley's torn skin, their expressions blank, their feet still stuck in the wounds, their legs stretched impossibly thin, like helium balloons tethered to him. I have no way out, Shelley roared. Chapter 107, Grindsail Town Arc. You attacked first. Penny clearly couldn't see anything, but the moment those gray girls crawled out from Shelley's wounds, she immediately clutched her ears and started screaming. The array beneath their feet suddenly activated. Thick, gray smoke billowed out and surged into countless writhing arms that reached for Saul and Penny. Meanwhile, Shelley continued slicing wounds into himself. With every long gash he made, a ghostly gray girl floated out from it. You're a wizard apprentice. Your vengeful spirits must be much stronger than an ordinary person, Shelley said, his mouth hanging open, drool dripping from the corner of his lips. You're insane, Saul said through gritted teeth. I was actually planning to let you live and keep cultivating the grinding sound fruit, but now, looks like even if I kill you, Mentor Rum won't say a word. Shelley's bloodshot eyes burned with madness. The moment he decided to attack Saul, he had already abandoned all reason. You wizards from the tower have never protected us. Shelley was now covered in girl-shaped balloons. As his body trembled with fury, the balloons pressed and rubbed against each other beside him. Saul tried to summon his magic, only to find the smoke rising beneath his feet was already crawling up his legs. The surrounding elemental particles had become sluggish, like senile old men, and refused to obey his commands. Seeing Saul fail to cast, Shelley threw back his head and laughed maniacally. See, even if the Wizard Tower refuses to give me power, I can still get it elsewhere. Now that this array is active, I am the only one who's strong. The rest of you are just sheep. The gray fog that bound Saul also lifted Shelley into the air. Saul could even feel the fog trying to drain the magic from his body. This was originally meant for Yuka. Shelley bent over, looming above Saul and Penny. But a first-rank apprentice from the Wizard Tower, I think you'll be even more useful. Be my nourishment, kill you and I'll leave this place. What can the Wizard Tower do to me then? Shelley flung out his arm. The fog beneath Saul surged again, trying to climb up his legs and engulf his entire body. However, no matter how hard it tried, the fog could only reach up to Saul's knees, unable to go any further. As if something was dragging it down from behind. What's going on? Why isn't it working? Shelley froze, anxiously peeling off the gray girls clinging to him, staring at the ground in disbelief. Then he realized he was descending too. The thick gray fog generated by the array was even starting to thin. What did you do? Shelley finally caught on. eyes blazing as he glared at Saul. Saul spread his hands. Why do you think I so kindly explained everything to you? Earlier, while Shelley's attention had been completely absorbed by his ascension, Saul had secretly channeled his magic into his feet and erased the most critical rings of the array. Now the array was like a leaky wooden bucket, with a hole growing larger by the second. No matter how much water Shelley tried to pour in, he could never fill it. After all, standing on someone else's turf, it's best to sabotage any trump cards they might have first. Shelley's chest heaved violently. With every breath he took, more gray fluid flowed from his body into the gray girls surrounding him. They swelled, becoming more and more bloated, while Shelley grew thinner and more withered. His stiff eyes twitched slightly, realization finally dawning. You provoked me on purpose. You deliberately made me attack first. Saul smiled, just a precaution. But in truth, Saul had done it on purpose. Shelley had been refining vengeful spirits and making deals with the barbarians. Still, as long as he kept delivering grinding sound fruit, the wizard tower might have turned a blind eye to his private dealings. Even if Saul confronted him in the name of the wizard tower, the most he'd get, like Nick said, was the right to extort him. Once Saul left, everything would return to how it was. Because the wizard tower didn't care about the girls Shelley hurt, nor about his shady deals with the barbarians. Even if Saul saved Penny today, once he left, Penny and Ada would only suffer worse fates. But now everything was clean. He wouldn't need to make up any excuses to mentor Rum. After all, once again, this was just self-defense. Attacking an emissary of the wizard tower, Saul raised both hands toward Shelley. Are you ready to pay with your life? Shelley had landed back on the ground. Between the gaps of the gray balloon girls, he saw Saul's raised arms, and the sudden black streaks of magic shooting from his hands. No, wait. As a rogue apprentice, Shelley had access to only a handful of Tier 0 spells. Desperately, he hurled out tremor shocks, but Saul neutralized them effortlessly. His crude casting caused his mental body to shudder uncontrollably. After only a few attempts, he suffered magical backlash. Saul's first strike shattered Shelley's legs. Then, with a single fatigue touch, he sent Shelley's already unstable mental body spiraling out of control. Shelley was horrified to find he couldn't cast a single spell anymore. When he finally collapsed to the ground, emaciated and frail as a skeleton, the gray girls on him had bloated into round, swollen balloons. Saul crouched down, tilting his head as he aimed. Actually, your problem with scattered mental power could be fixed. Shelley's head jerked up. But I'm not going to tell you. An arrow of pure force materialized and pierced Shelley's skull. The spark of light that had just appeared in Shelley's eyes froze there forever. At the moment of his death, the gray girls on him suddenly revealed vicious, twisted expressions and pounced on his corpse. Though Shelley was clearly already dead, his body let out anguished howls. Bits of flesh and limbs were thrown into the air and rained down again. With their fat, radish-like fingers, the gray girls ripped a white soul projection out of Shelley's corpse. Grinning wickedly, they opened their mouths wide and began to feast. The white soul rapidly shrank before Saul's eyes. Though Penny couldn't see it, it was as if she could hear the crunching. Frightened, she shrank back behind Saul. Ever since her nightmare butterfly cocoon was removed, she'd become more and more like a normal girl. She could feel fear now. Suddenly, Shelley's white soul projection ballooned, and a black spot began spreading rapidly from its center. He's turning into a wraith. Saul immediately raised his hand. Strike undead. Then, strike undead times 10. The black spot finally collapsed and faded, and the white soul was ultimately devoured by the gray balloon girls. But even after consuming Shelley's soul, the girls didn't vanish. One by one, they floated slowly, turning to face Saul, each face now filled not with rage, but lifeless resentment. As expected, not all vengeful spirits vanish after killing their enemy. No sooner had he spoken than the ghost girls wailed and charged at him. Saul swiftly pulled a scroll from his cloak and yanked it open just before the gray girls reached him. Spirit Armor Spell Scroll. Blocks contact attacks from incorporeal beings. Redeemable at the Wizard Tower Registry. A shimmering, multicolored bubble enveloped Saul and Penny. No matter how viciously the ghost girls attacked, they couldn't break through the bubble. And Saul, standing calmly inside, picked them off one by one with ease. Pop! Every time a ghost was slain, it burst like a balloon. White fluff spilled out, floating down, but was swept upward again by the surging magic in the room. Once a dozen ghosts were slain, the entire room looked like a snowy wonderland, filled with drifting flakes. When the spirit armor's duration ended, it faded on its own. While traveling, Saul had prepared by exchanging for a few Tier 1 spell scrolls just in case. But each one was pricey, and considering the thickness of his coin pouch, he couldn't afford many. Feeling the pinch for a brief second, Saul stood up, ready to check if Shelley's strange setup could at least earn him back some of what he spent. Chapter 108, Grindsail Town Arc, Sonial. However, the moment Saul took a single step forward, it was as if he had broken some delicate balance. Countless snowflakes floating in the air suddenly surged toward him. What the? Saul was startled, instinctively raising his hands. But the snowflakes were heading straight for his hands. The moment they saw them, they desperately tried to burrow inside. These are all soul fragments. Lowering his arms, Saul saw the snowflakes spinning as they entered his skin. Miniature snowflake whirlwinds began forming around the room. A look of delight appeared on Saul's face. So many soul fragments, just these alone are worth 10 spell scrolls. He simply spread his arms open, letting the soul fragments flow into his hands. As the soul essence absorbs these fragments, my magic power is rising quickly too, so quantity really can lead to a qualitative change. Even without the black crystal orb, Saul could vaguely sense his magic power surpassing 50 joules, and it was still climbing. However, as time went by, a scorching pain began to build in both his hands, as though his skin was about to boil. Suddenly, the diary flew out on its own. April 14th, year 316 of a lunar calendar. Feels good, doesn't it? Snatching up so many soul fragments at once. That stockpile others spent years accumulating, all yours now. But is taking what belongs to others really that easy? Those vengeful girls couldn't beat you. But they can still turn you into one of them. How does it feel to eat the essence of so many young girls all at once? Don't you want to put on a puffy skirt now? Maybe you're not Saul anymore. Maybe we should start calling you Sonial. Vile! Saul roared, startling Penny so badly she stumbled backward in fright. But the white snowflake-like soul fragments were still relentlessly burrowing into his hands, and Saul couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. He knew that the diary only appeared when time was short. He had to find a way to stop the invasion of these soul fragments. But soul fragments were already fragmented. Saul's usual dead spirit attacks wouldn't affect them. And soul armor wouldn't necessarily interpret the fragments' invasion as an actual attack either. Then I'll just have to eliminate the malicious consciousness hidden within these fragments. Scanning the room, Saul spotted a desk and some writing materials in the corner. Everything was covered in dust. Clearly the room's previous owner hadn't studied in a long time. Saul grabbed a sheet of paper and quickly sketched out 2 composite runes. Putting down the pen, he double-checked the key coordinates on the rune diagram, then immediately began constructing the spell. This was a rank 1 spell he had nearly finished analyzing, Soul Borer. He had prepared it for the moment his magic power was enough to become a second-rank apprentice. Now, to avoid truly becoming Sonial, Saul had to harness the chaotic consciousness within the soul fragments to power the construction of a rank 1 spell model and break through. There were certainly risks. Using these murky, external energies to build the spell would make it far less stable than using his own magic. It could lead to unpredictable mutations. The spell might even become unusable, permanently occupying space in Saul's mental construct. Rank 1 spells were different from rank 0 ones. In fact, only spells at rank 1 and above were considered true spells. These true spells were too complex to reconstruct every time from scratch, so mages would permanently fix them into their mental construct for quick casting. So what Saul was doing now was essentially sacrificing a valuable slot for a rank 1 spell, just to burn away the chaotic awareness hidden within the soul fragments. But losing a rank 1 spell was still better than letting his consciousness be warped into that of a girl. Once he was certain the 2 composite runes were correct, Saul had no time to write the simpler runes out. He closed his eyes and began constructing Soul Borer. The 2 composite runes began taking shape within his mental construct. The speed and stability of the build would surely make Kelly jealous if she could see it. Dozens of basic runes followed, leaping in from all directions within his mental space, converging with the composite runes. Activation, transformation, interlinked by magic. At that moment, Saul infused the consciousness and energy from the soul fragments into the formation. The vibrant runes shuddered. When they recovered from their frozen state and began flowing again, their lines carried an almost delicate grace. Saul frowned, but could only let the process continue. In the room, Penny sat on the ground with her knees drawn to her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but in Saul's earlier shout of "Vile," she'd sensed something deeply complex and overwhelming. So much so that the little girl didn't dare to move. She could only sit and wait quietly for her big brother Saul to finish whatever he was doing and come back to her. Time passed. Eventually, Penny's tiny head drooped onto her knees. She had fallen asleep. Meanwhile, outside the tower in Grindsail Town, a massive upheaval was unfolding. Jace was leading Ada in an attempt to infiltrate the tower. They were pressed against the wall of a nearby building. It was Ada's first time getting this close. He looked across the clearing where the grinding sound fruit trees grew, his heart a tangled mess. The grinding sound fruit had brought prosperity and peace to the town, but it had also been the root of suffering for countless families. Those not chosen drifted in a daze within the town's illusion of peace, until the day the nightmare came knocking. Ada had once been one of them. But he couldn't let Penny die, even if the price was a lifetime on the run with her. "Hey, focus," Jace nudged Ada and pointed at the distant tower. "Penny, in there now. I don't know which floor exactly." There were no guards outside the tower. Ordinary soldiers generally avoided it. Most of the manpower was still stationed around the grinding sound fruit fields. Only when necessary would anyone be summoned to the tower. That gave Jace and Ada the opening they needed. Jace had already mapped out the soldiers' patrol routes. He began explaining the plan. "When we move, we go together. See that big door under the tower? We wait for the blind spot in the patrol and slip in. Penny just went in, so the door might still be unlocked. But I don't know if there are guards inside. If we encounter anyone, take them out immediately. If things get loud and backup comes, I'll draw them away. You focus on finding Penny and getting her out." Sweat poured from Ada's palms. He nodded. "Where do you think Penny will be?" "No idea," Jace said, looking him in the eye. "But this is our last chance." Ada froze. He understood all too well how dangerous this was. They might not be able to save Penny, and might not come back themselves. But he said nothing more. He simply wiped his hands roughly on his pants. All right, I'll move on your signal. Wait, what's that over there? Ada followed Jace's gaze. Farther north than even the northern outskirts, a line of towering figures was slowly appearing. Even at this distance, their charging presence sent a familiar and terrifying pressure crashing over him. Barbarians. Chapter 109. The barbarians are here. The barbarians are here. The news spread through the town like wildfire. Almost at the same moment, Jace spotted the barbarians, Mayor Rupert, who had been waiting near the fields for any word, also caught sight of the figures charging from the distance, alerted by the soldiers beside him. His vision darkened, and he nearly collapsed backward. Fortunately, a quick-reacting soldier caught him just in time, saving him from losing face in front of his men. Why would the barbarians suddenly come now? It clearly wasn't yet time to hand over the grinding sound fruits this year. Had the barbarians simply grown impatient? Quick, gather everyone. We absolutely cannot let them reach the fields, the mayor shouted frantically, and send someone to call back Captain Jeff. Several soldiers immediately broke formation and dashed off in different directions. A soldier remaining behind, still supporting the mayor, spoke urgently. Mayor, should we activate the defense barrier? Yes, yes. The mayor finally remembered the town's last resort. I'll go summon the wizard. Summoning all his strength, the mayor got to his feet. He stumbled toward the tower gate and, abandoning all decorum, began banging on the door with all his might. Master Shelley, the barbarians are attacking. The barbarians are attacking. Although the town hadn't suffered a direct barbarian incursion in a long time, the horrifying and bloody legends of their past raids had never ceased. That was why, even with multiple girls dying because of the grinding sound fruits, most townspeople still chose not to leave. But the mayor knocked for ages, and no response came from inside the tower. Panic began to rise in his chest. Had Master Shelley already begun? That couldn't be right. He always took his time to torment the girls before beginning. At this point in the process, he should still be in the early stages, just the appetizer. He could stop at any moment. Master Shelley, Mayor Rupert raised his voice, but the tremble at the end betrayed his growing unease. Barbarians were known for their exceptional physical strength. In the brief chaos, the figures that had once seemed distant were already within a few thousand meters of the town. Soldiers with sharp eyes could even make out the primitive weapons in their hands. A few soldiers dragged out 3 to 4 meter long anti-charge barricades, placing them between empty houses and the tower. But those barricades looked like little more than props, completely laughable. Others fetched ranged weapons, bows, spears. Though they were stored nearby in one of the empty houses, they had been neglected for years and were poorly maintained. They rarely faced strong enemies, and when they did, their powerful wizard would take care of it. But today, their wizard hadn't stirred. Mayor Rupert even tried to force his way into the tower, but the door wouldn't budge. From his hiding spot, Jace's heart skipped a beat. The tower door couldn't be opened from the outside. If he and Ada rushed there only to find themselves locked out. Ada, who had witnessed the same thing, turned pale with dread, but the thought of Penny trapped inside made him even more anxious. The mayor can't open the door. What if that wizard, already doing something to Penny? Ada tugged at Jace's sleeve, his thoughts already spiraling to the worst-case scenario. Jace glanced at Ada's pale face, understanding exactly what he was afraid of. He tried to reassure him. The barbarians are here. That might actually be our chance. If the wizard doesn't want to watch the town fall, he'll have to stop whatever he's doing. He looked back at the empty house behind them. No one usually stays there. Let's hide inside for now. When the wizard comes out, we'll seize the opportunity to enter the tower and find Penny. Ada glanced again toward the tower. Mayor Rupert was now having soldiers try to ram the door, but it remained utterly unmoved. And the barbarians, they were nearly at the town's edge. Ada grabbed Jace's arm. "Jace, go back into town and hide." If the barbarians broke through the town's fragile defenses, it would become unimaginably dangerous. But Jace shook his hand free. "You think I'd trust you alone with my daughter?" Elsewhere, the first barbarian had reached the barricade. He spotted the soldiers and began drooling in excitement. A second barbarian arrived, paused in front of the barricade, and looked around in confusion. Someone couldn't hold back and loose the first arrow. That barbarian wasn't too bright, but he had an instinctive sense for combat. He sidestepped, and the arrow only grazed his arm. The sight of blood made the barbarian roar with excitement. He raised his leg and kicked the barricade. It slid back a good distance, knocking over several soldiers in the process. "Mayor, the barbarians are nearly on us. Captain Jeff isn't here. Please give the defense orders." A soldier ran to Rupert, still stationed beneath the tower, and cried out. "Defense? Orders? You really think these useless scraps of wood and metal can stop barbarians?" "Keep calling for Master Shelley. Only if he activates the magical defenses will we survive. What use are you people? What use?" Seeing the mayor slipping into panic and incoherence, the soldier took 2 steps back, stunned. Then he turned and ran off to join the frantic defense. The front line had already broken out into combat. As Mayor Rupert had feared, the soldiers were being pushed back rapidly. And as each one fell, the barbarians hacked off their heads without hesitation. Panic began to spread. They wouldn't be able to hold the line much longer. "Father," a middle-aged man on horseback came galloping out from the town, a bundle strapped to his back. He jumped off the horse and threw the bundle at the mayor. "Father, take this, use this." The mayor was jolted back to reality by his son's shout. He reached into the bundle and felt the familiar shape of long, grinding sound fruits. His mind began to clear. He had grown so used to relying on the wizard that, once that contact was cut off, he didn't know what to do. "You're right, those barbarians came here for this. Let's give it to them first." But his son whispered anxiously, "These were meant to be this summer's tribute. If we give them away now, we'll be in trouble when summer comes." The mayor knew that too, but gritted his teeth. One crisis at a time. Master Shelley must be at a critical stage in his advancement. We can't disturb him. Keep knocking on the door, make sure he notices and activates the barrier. Seeing his father's still disordered mind, the son could only nod. Mayor Rupert clutched the bundle and began running toward the barbarians. But when he saw the blood-soaked battlefield and the severed heads raised high, he froze in fear. He called over a trusted soldier, "You, take this to the barbarians. Give it to the one with the markings on his face." The soldier felt the bundle and immediately understood what it was. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. Mayor now, in front of everyone. Wasn't this supposed to be a secret deal between the wizard and the barbarians? If they handed the grinding sound fruits over now, wouldn't the townspeople realize that the fruits hadn't been reduced at all, that they had just been given to the barbarians? Wouldn't the furious townsfolk tear them to pieces? "If you don't want those barbarians to chop your family in half, then go," the mayor barked, shoving him forward. As the trusted soldier ran toward the barbarians, the mayor let out a sigh of relief. He rushed back to his son, ready to give more orders. Suddenly, he saw his son staring behind him, eyes wide with horror. The mayor turned instinctively. He saw the barbarian who had received the bundle. His next action was to raise his weapon and swing it at the soldier. The first slash missed. The second took off the soldier's head. Then a towering barbarian appeared, carrying a small figure cloaked in black and red. They walked over to the one holding the bundle and took the grinding sound fruits. The smaller figure squeezed the bundle, then turned to look at Mayor Rupert. Black and red stripes marked the face beneath the hood. A barbarian priest, Mayor Ruper's heart went ice cold. He grabbed his son and shouted, "Back to the town! Shut the gates, the barbarians, they've come to massacre us." Chapter 110, Second Rank. Boom! It was as if a towering structure had suddenly been erected in Saul's mental world, shaking the very foundations of his entire spiritual body. First tier spell, Soul Borer successfully constructed. Saul slowly stood up, feeling the change from a first-rank apprentice to a second rank. Though truth be told, there wasn't much of a difference. His mentor had said before that the distinction between a first and second-rank apprentice lay only in the strength of their spell mastery. There was no fundamental transformation in their body or spirit. But if he concentrated, Saul could indeed sense something subtly different. That was the influence brought by the first-rank spell inside his mental body. The Soul Borer, whose final form was still a mystery, was continuously affecting Saul's mana and mind. For now, the influence was faint, but Saul could feel it. Once he continued to reinforce and refine this spell, that influence would deepen. And when that time came, Saul would have to find a way to resist it. If not, both his mind and body would start to deteriorate. But the only truly effective method would be to find a locator of his own, to dispel and resist the inevitable corruption brought by spellcasting, and to stabilize his mental body. Locator. Saul glanced at his left shoulder and thought, how can I convince the diary to move? The locator could wait a bit longer. Saul stood up, and when he turned around, he found Penny already fast asleep. He chuckled and shook her awake. "Penny, wake up." But Saul also realized Penny wasn't really relaxed enough to fall asleep here. It was more likely that his earlier battle with Shelley and the standoff with the Wraith had affected her mentally. For an ordinary person, sleep was the best form of protection when their mind couldn't cope. Penny groggily raised her head, her eyes still murky. Saul helped her up. "I'll take you out of here, but be mentally prepared. Once you leave, you and Ada probably won't be able to stay in this town." Penny stood with Saul's support. The thought of leaving their stable home crossed her mind, but her expression stayed relatively calm. "I'll take Ada and go." She really did act like Ada's older sister. Saul searched through Shelley's remains one last time, taking anything valuable and discarding the rest. But he never found the book that supposedly allowed the artificial creation of vengeful spirits. In the end, he copied down the entire ritual array from the ground, and based on his memory, restored the parts he had destroyed earlier. Only then did he leave the room on the third floor of the tower with Penny. But just as they stepped onto the spiral staircase, Saul heard the sounds of wailing, crying, and killing from outside the tower. Something was wrong. Saul immediately grabbed Penny and dashed down the stairs. The entrance of the tower had been sealed by Shelley's spell. He clearly hadn't wanted anyone interrupting his casting. Which also meant that when things went south outside, no one could call upon him for help. Saul pressed Penny against the wall, then he threw the door open. What lay beyond was a scene straight from hell. Corpses of Grind Sale Town's residents littered the ground, and everywhere, wild barbarians were hunting down the living. Across the way, the fruit-grinding fields had their stone walls completely toppled, the inside a chaotic mess. Severed limbs lay draped over stones, dead or alive. It was impossible to tell. By now, the true battlefield had shifted toward the town's outer wall. Barbarians were trying to climb the not-too-tall wall, while the guards did everything they could to push them back down. While Saul scanned the situation, 2 barbarians spotted him. They didn't care about his stunned expression. With gleaming blades raised, they charged. Their sharp weapons screamed through the air, slashing at Saul from both sides. The barbarians, wide mouths, exhaled frosty breath, as if already imagining Saul sliced into pieces. But before their blades could fall, one barbarian's body suddenly twisted, his limbs snapping together as though clutched by a giant invisible hand. Soft flesh surrendered first, twisted and snapped by the invisible force. His rigid bones stubbornly resisted, until they cracked one by one, breaking through his skin in jagged black-red spikes. The other barbarian had to stop his assault as well. A black smoke began seeping from his 7 orifices, and patches of his skin started to char. Then came flickers of red flame, creeping from his ears, licking at his eyes, catching his hair. If the first barbarian died swiftly, albeit horribly, the second suffered much longer. He howled in agony, stumbling backward on failing legs. He only managed a few more steps before his charred feet collapsed, bringing down his massive frame in a cloud of black ash. Saul followed the fleeing barbarian's path with his gaze, only to lock eyes with a new figure. A scrawny barbarian, face painted with some unknown substance, was riding on the shoulders of another massive tribesman. They had a priest. Then this wasn't some minor raid. But the local wizard apprentice had just died. Saul stepped toward the priest, raising his hand. His mental body stirred. The first-rank spell model carved within was instantly activated, ready to unleash. Transparent phantom worms, soul borers, formed in Saul's palm, writhing slowly around his hand. The barbarian priest squinted at the sight and spoke word by word. New wizard apprentice. He didn't recognize Saul, but could tell he wasn't from Grindsail Town. The priest stared hard at Saul, seemingly weighing whether to engage. Suddenly, he opened his mouth wide and with a vicious yank, tore out 2 of his own teeth. Blood dripped from the corners of his mouth as he summoned 2 nearby barbarians. Eat block, witch. The 2 warriors obediently swallowed the priest's bloody teeth. Then came pained roars as they beat their chests with ferocious strength. Their dark skin rapidly flushed red, gleaming unnaturally like it would burst at any moment. But their expressions only grew more frenzied. One charged Saul with a crazed howl. The priest didn't stick around either. He raised his wooden staff and smashed it down on the head of the barbarian he was riding. Attack Grindsail. Aside from the 2 red-skinned warriors heading toward Saul, the rest of the barbarians abandoned their prey and followed the priest toward the town's crumbling wall. Saul glanced that way, but caught sight of 2 familiar figures in a nearby house. It was Ada and Jace. They hadn't fled the town. They had been hiding in an empty building, waiting for a chance to rescue Penny. They were now staring at Saul in shock, not even realizing they had been spotted. Thankfully, the other barbarians had all moved toward the wall, or they'd be dead by now. The 2 red-skinned warriors were now nearly upon Saul. Saul sneered. Compared to Jace, I really am the dishonorable one. He raised his hand, and both barbarians slipped and tumbled to the ground, one after the other. They struggled to rise, grabbing at the ground for leverage, but the greasy earth pulled them deeper as they tried to shift their weight. Saul then cast Scorching Breath. Flames erupted across the barbarians' bodies, a wave of heat surging forth. But Saul quickly noticed, though they screamed, the flames didn't fell them. Their skin was only mildly scorched. The priest's teeth boosted their magic resistance. Saul suddenly snapped his hand, and 2 soul borers flew toward the red-skinned warriors. Then let's see what this mutated first-rank spell can really do. Chapter 111, A Wizard. The 2 red-skinned barbarians had just struggled to their feet when they suddenly froze in place. Their eyes bulged out as if they had seen the most terrifying thing imaginable. The madness on their faces was instantly replaced by sheer fear. In the face of death, even mindless barbarians must bow their heads. The moment the soul borers touched their skin, they burrowed in and disappeared. But their skin began to writhe and ripple continuously, as if worms were squirming underneath it. And soon there were two, three, more and more. Their entire bodies squirmed in a grotesque and disturbing manner. If one looked closely into their eyes, they wouldn't see Saul's reflection, only countless tangled worms reflected in their pupils. Soul Borer wasn't an instant-kill spell. It was sorcery that drastically weakened both the body and mind of its target. It would lead the afflicted to a slow and agonizing death. Even though the two barbarians had their magic resistance temporarily enhanced by the barbarian priest, they still couldn't withstand a first-rank sorcery. Their life force rapidly dissipated, leaving behind only two writhing husks. From start to finish, they didn't utter a single scream. Everything was eerily silent. They were dead. Having just become a second-rank apprentice, Saul had now cast two first-rank spells in a row. But he still felt that his mana reserves had room to spare, and his mental state was only slightly disturbed, nothing that would prevent him from casting again. Saul clenched his fists. His spirit resin was finally beginning to show its power. As long as he could gather more soul fragments and refine the impurities, he could continue to enhance his mana. Even his mental strength would become increasingly solid with the aid of soul power. Saul turned around, ready to call Penny out, only to be stunned when he saw the two red-skinned barbarians, now devoid of life, start moving again. They were shaking their heads, twisting their limbs, swaying their hips, and most horrifying of all, they wore bright, beaming smiles. They were dancing. So this is what happens when his soul borers are enhanced by vengeful energy. Watching the two red-skinned barbarians perform what could only be described as belly dancing was downright eye-searing. Saul made a mental note to prioritize learning new first-rank spells. But what Saul didn't know was how utterly horrifying this dance looked from afar to Ada and Jace. Jace heard a constant clang, clang, clang sound beside him. Trembling, he looked down, only to discover that the knife in his hand had been tapping against the wall without him realizing it. He turned his shaking head to look at Ada, just as Ada turned to look at him, also trembling. Both of them were shaking. How did you bring the wizard back? Jace stammered. Ada tried to recall the first time he'd met Saul, but all he could remember were those two dead barbarians still dancing. When they looked back again, they were startled to find Saul had appeared right in front of them. The two of them reflexively flinched backward, eyes full of disbelief and fear as they stared at Saul. Saul wasn't surprised by their reactions. Ordinary people were always afraid of wizards. People like Penny, whose perception was warped, were the exception. Saul leaned against the window frame and said quietly, "Penny is in the tower. After you go in, shut the door. That's the safest place right now. As long as no one inside opens it, no one outside can break in." The most dangerous presence in the tower had already been dealt with by Saul. It had become a fortress of refuge. Without waiting for them to get up, Saul turned and started walking toward Grindsail Town. "So?" Unexpectedly, Ada called out from behind the window, summoning the courage to speak. "Was it you who saved Penny?" Saul stopped and turned to look at Ada. "Don't thank me too much. It was just a convenience. In the future, make sure to keep Penny away from wizards. Wizards aren't good people." Ada froze. Saul was a wizard himself. Why say that wizards weren't good people? Was he saying that he wasn't a good person either? The walls of Grindsail Town finally collapsed with a mighty crash, and even louder wails pierced the sky. Saul didn't linger. He ran toward the barbarians. Behind him, Ada shouted once more. "I'm sorry, Saul, I'm sorry I left you behind back then." This time Saul didn't stop. He simply raised a hand in the air without looking back. After all, it hadn't been him who'd been abandoned back then. Ada hadn't mentioned it when they first met, only now apologizing after finding out Saul was a wizard. It was still a matter of power and status. Saul didn't care much about what the original host had been through. As Saul drew closer, the barbarian priest took notice of him once again. In fact, when Saul had swiftly and decisively killed the two berserk barbarians, the priest had already realized Saul was no mere first-rank apprentice. The barbarian priest himself was only barely at the level of a second-rank apprentice, and watching Saul approach step by step made the pressure on his heart grow unbearable. He was considering retreating. Though Lord Bill from the Wizard's Tower had ordered him to purge Grind Sail Town, things were clearly beyond his control now. At that moment, more movement came from within the town. To the priest's surprise, another wizard from Grind Sail, Yuka, had returned with soldiers. Each one wore expressions twisted with anger and sorrow. So it's today that they returned. The barbarian priest was all too familiar with that look. If he got caught between both sides now, they would surely try everything to stop him from escaping. It was time to go. He waved his wooden staff. The barbarians began to retreat. They came fast and fled even faster. Saul tried his best to intercept some of them, but most ran around him. In the end, he only managed to leave behind 7 or 8 corpses. One of them, however, was carrying a large bundle, which made him a particular target for Saul, and he fell close by. The bundle's fabric didn't look like something a barbarian would have. The neatly tied knot on it didn't match barbarian handiwork either. Most of the barbarians had fled by now. Since Saul didn't know any flight spells, he could only watch as the barbarian priest gave orders to delay him while fleeing on the back of another person in the opposite direction. Giving up on the chase, Saul squatted down and untied the bundle. Dozens of grinding sound fruits tumbled out, clearly picked some time ago, with dried-out stems. Had the barbarians stolen them? Or, as the old madman had said, was there some deal between the town and the barbarians? Why had the barbarians suddenly shown up and gone out of their way to destroy the grind sound fruit fields? Did they just overturn the table and tear up the agreement? A while later, a young, unfamiliar apprentice ran out of the town and stopped near Saul, panting heavily, eyes filled with caution. Who are you?" he asked warily. "Tower," Saul replied flatly. His gaze turned once more to the direction the barbarians had fled, then to the 3-story tower, and finally to the ruined grind sound fruit fields. "I'll be reporting what happened here." Fear flashed across Yuka's face. "Before the wizards assigned to investigate arrive, you'd better think carefully about how you're going to explain what happened to Wizard Shelley. I have other matters. I'm leaving." Saul had no intention of talking more. He didn't stay to deal with Grind Sail Town. Yuka and the people he brought back could handle the aftermath. As for Penny and the others, they likely couldn't stay in the town any longer. Saul left her a bag of money, nothing more. Penny had given up her eyes, and Saul had changed her fate from being refined into something else. It wasn't kindness, it was an equal exchange. Though the sky had brightened, the sunlight couldn't melt away the bitter spring chill. Saul walked alone at the edge of the desert and the town, leaving behind the cries and wails of Grind Sail. Though he had lived there for 3 days, Saul still couldn't feel any sadness for its suffering. Everything was blurred, like looking through a frosted mirror. That wasn't his world anymore. Saul looked down. From time to time, translucent soul borers slithered out from under the skin of his hands, spun in the air, then burrowed back in. He was now a wizard. As everyone else began clearing the battlefield and treating the wounded, one woman climbed out from the collapsed walls and snuck toward the grind sound fruit fields. Yuka had forbidden anyone from leaving the town, fearing stray barbarians might still be lurking. But this woman disobeyed the wizard's orders. Jenny, already in her 40s, ran harder than she ever had in her life. She was afraid someone might stop her. Fortunately, no one noticed her. At the wall's edge, torches stood tall, burning even in daylight with faint flames. Jenny looked around frantically, then pulled a broken wooden torch from the wall's base. She carefully lit it, drawing ragged breaths of excitement. Once the torch was aflame, she climbed over the field's wall, bleeding from sharp stones without hesitation. She arrived at the collapsed trellises where the vines had tangled together, grinned wide, and with trembling hands, set the grinding sound fruits ablaze. The fire roared to life. Her face turned bright red from the flames. Jenny tossed aside the torch, eyes wide with glee, and finally burst into wild laughter. It's gone, it's all gone, Chapter 112, Mushroom People and Skin. A few kilometers away from Grindsail Town, the retreating barbarians had already fled to this location. Stop! The priest, blood still trickling from the corner of his mouth and speech a bit slurred, raised his hand to halt the group. Straightening up, he looked around to get his bearings. That way by that tree go. The group began to move again. Suddenly, a sharp cry rang out from above. A giant bird dove from the sky. A massive black shadow quickly engulfed all the barbarians. A blonde woman in full armor leapt from the back of the bird, landing directly on the ground. Second-rank wizard Kira unsheathed the longsword at her waist without a hint of emotion. Another nest of them. Neither the barbarian priest nor the common barbarians dared to resist under the pressure of a second-rank wizard. They all fell to the ground, heads buried in their arms, trembling. Not one dared lift their head. Kira swung her sword in a wide arc. In an instant, the blade expanded to several times its original length. One sweep and blood sprayed everywhere. With a single strike, she severed every barbarian at the waist. None survived. Her golden eyes scanned the human heads hanging from the barbarians' belts. Running off with food all of a sudden. So the border-clearing operation really has been leaked, she said with a cold snort, though her face showed no anger. Good thing I set out half a month early. I want to see just how many people have gotten wind of this. Kira made a hand signal. As the giant bird swooped again, she jumped back onto its back. The two quickly disappeared into the sky. At that moment, Saul, just returning to the carriage, seemed to hear something. He looked up at the sky. But he saw nothing. The thick branches and heavy clouds blocked his view. "My lord," the loyal coachman who had been waiting patiently, stepped forward to salute. "To Borderfall City," Saul ordered as he climbed into the carriage. The coachman asked no questions, simply jumped onto the driver's seat, tugged at the reins, and they were off. Inside the carriage, Saul began reviewing the gains and losses from this operation. Shelley's death and the disaster at Grindsail Town would have to be reported to Mentor Rum. For the sake of accurate information delivery, he would need to report it personally. Saul felt there was more to the appearance of those barbarians, especially the part about them trading with border wizards in exchange for living space. It just didn't sound like something barbarians would do. And the item they were trading for was grinding sound fruits. Then they suddenly launched an attack, flipping the negotiation table unilaterally. Something about this didn't sit right with Saul. Maybe Senior Byron and Nick would have deeper insights into it. The carriage raced on, and after 2 days Saul reached the outskirts of Borderfall City. He even arrived a day ahead of schedule. But the coachman didn't take him into the city. Instead, he turned onto another narrow path that led uphill through a forest. The path wound upward until it reached halfway up the mountain, where a tall, slender black castle stood. Black Castle, the pre-arranged meeting place for this journey. As they entered the forest, Saul noticed a sign posted by the roadside. It was written in Common, Northern Tongue, and Nohik. Black Castle Forest, no entry for ordinary people. The atmosphere changed completely once the carriage passed that sign. The path through the woods was narrow, just wide enough for the carriage to squeeze through. Saul peered out the window at the gnarled, eerie trees outside. Oddly enough, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. Then the carriage came to a sudden stop. "What is it?" Saul opened the door and found the coachman pale-faced and bowing his head low. No reply. Saul looked outside, and then he saw them. Along the forest path ahead, where the sunlight couldn't pierce through the dense foliage, people squatted on the roadside, hugging their knees with their heads buried in their chests. They were all completely naked, their heads tucked in tight against their stomachs. And most bizarre of all, each of them had a huge mushroom cap growing from the top of their head. With the wind, white spores drifted gently from beneath the mushroom caps, scattering into the shadowy underbrush. Saul quickly covered his mouth and nose, his eyes wary of those drifting spores. He began visualizing the human-monster movement diagram, but nothing changed. The forest was still dark, and the mushroom people still crouched silently on both sides of the road. Not spirits. Wait. Saul immediately cut off the visualization, eyes narrowing at the white spores floating in the air. He began meditating again, and as he slipped into a half-submerged state, he saw nothing, not a single spore. He had never encountered this before, being unable to see something visible to the naked eye while in a meditative state. What in the world were those spores? Forget it. Whatever they are, they're definitely not safe. Nothing wizards make ever is. Still on alert, Saul patted the coachman on the shoulder. "Let's slow the carriage down and go through carefully. Don't touch the mushroom people." But the coachman didn't respond. Saul patted again, twice, then realized something was wrong. He turned his head. The person holding the reins on the driver's seat was a mushroom person. It was crouched over, staring in terror at the reins in its hands. "What the hell?" Saul shouted, kicking the mushroom person off the carriage in one swift motion. He grabbed the reins and took control. A quick glance around showed no sign of the real coachman. Saul snapped the reins lightly, urging the horse into a cautious trot while holding his breath and staying alert. Suddenly, he spotted a mushroom person by the roadside. It looked exactly like the coachman. Grabbing the edge of the carriage, Saul leaned far to the side. Just as they passed the mushroom man, he snatched him up and threw him onto the driver's bench. The coachman was unconscious, his eyes tightly shut. Saul checked, he was still breathing. Although a large mushroom had grown from his head, his clothes were still intact. Saul had no way of removing the mushroom for now, so he continued on with the man. Was Senior Byron somewhere in this place? If this was a Wizard Tower outpost or Allied territory, then why had they attacked his coachman? Well, Wizard Towers did have a reputation for turning on their own. Saul stayed on high alert. The transparent borers began wriggling once again across his hands. The carriage climbed higher, and the dark silhouette of Black Castle gradually came into view. But then Saul was forced to stop again. The mushroom people were gone from the roadside, replaced by sparse, stunted trees. Twisted branches stretched over the road. And dangling from one of those branches, right across the road, was a figure. Its whole body was limp, its skin sagging like loose fabric. It was an entire human skin. Saul pushed the mushroomed coachman into the carriage and kept his eyes on the skin. After a moment, seeing no other threat, he urged the carriage forward again. The horses, trained for the Wizard Tower, were surprisingly unfazed. In this creepy, haunted atmosphere, they only seemed a little jittery. Saul patted one on the rear, trying to calm it down. But he himself wasn't calm. His eyes stayed locked on the human skin. They approached, drew closer, past each other. And just as they were about to brush by, the skin inflated, swelling from head to toe like a balloon. It puffed up into the shape of a person, then with a soft thump, dropped from the branch and landed on its feet. It took a step forward toward Saul. Arrow spell. Saul raised a hand. A glowing arrow formed in his palm and shot out with a sharp whoosh. A balloon, huh? Let's deflate you a bit. But just as it was about to hit, the human skin tilted its head and dodged easily. Its face fully inflated now, the features snapping into place. It looked at Saul with a confused expression. Hug. Saul Senior Byron. Chapter 113, Black Castle. Senior Byron, why were you hanging from a tree like a human skin? Saul asked deadpan, as Byron climbed back into the carriage. He had really thought Byron was some kind of monster just now. Oh, Byron seemed a bit embarrassed. He glanced at the coachman who had already been healed and resumed driving, a small crack still visible on his neck. I just took a bath. So you hung yourself up to dry afterwards. Saul was speechless. As they chatted, they arrived at the gates of the Black Castle. Saul and Byron got out of the carriage one after the other. Saul looked at the driver, who still had a slightly wilted mushroom cap on his head, and reminded him, the mushroom on your head isn't really a problem anymore. It'll naturally fall off in a couple of days once it withers. In fact, the mushroom had already lost its earlier plumpness and looked a bit droopy. The usually emotionless coachman suddenly looked up, eyes brimming with tears, and dropped to his knees with a loud thud. The mushroom umbrella smashed into the ground with a thump. The coachman didn't say a word, because no words could express his feelings. Having survived all this time at the tower, he already understood the rules of survival. If you're useful, you live. Still, he kowtowed twice toward Saul's back. The mushroom umbrella struck the ground again, then was pulled out, now looking even more wilted. Though Saul didn't turn back, he heard everything behind him. It was actually you who saved him, Byron said. M.H.M. Byron nodded at Saul and pointed at him. Saul understood. Byron was acknowledging that Saul hadn't abandoned the coachman. Byron's mouth split into a grin. The coachman is a tool. When traveling, one should take care to maintain and protect their tools. His words sounded heartless, but that was just the way of Wizard. As long as something was useful, it was worth protecting. The two approached the narrow entrance of the castle. The door itself was just as narrow, 1 meter wide and 4 meters tall. Anyone a bit chubby wouldn't be able to squeeze through. Byron stepped forward and lightly knocked twice with his knuckles. Saul could feel it. Those 2 knocks were laced with magic. Suddenly, a vertical pupil split open in the center of the door, layers of rune arrays forming its iris. The eye scanned Byron's entire body, then turned to Saul behind him. Then the pupil closed, and the door swung open outward with a click. The Black Castle's gate opens outward to let people in. If it opens inward, that's for material transport. Don't go in by mistake, Byron explained as he led the way. Saul followed closely behind. Once they passed through, the door closed behind them automatically. The inside of the castle wasn't gloomy or frightening. On the contrary, it was lavishly decorated. But the decorations shared that same narrow aesthetic. The main hall ceiling was 10 meters high, with a crystal chandelier hanging down 5 meters from the top. It swayed gently, looking like it could fall at any moment. The hall itself was only about 3 meters wide, but stretched several dozen meters in length. At the far end was a symmetrical spiral staircase, each step barely a meter wide. Not fat-friendly at all. As Saul took in the interior, a dark green branch suddenly slithered out from the door behind him. It looked like the shriveled hand of a corpse, silently reaching toward the back of Saul's head. The hand twisted into a claw, inching closer to Saul's neck. Suddenly, a black tentacle shot out from behind Saul's neck and cleanly wrapped around the creeping branch, performing a deadly chokehold followed by a wild spinning whip, instantly destroying the attacker. By the time Byron and Saul turned around at the sound, All that remained on the floor were a few snapped pieces of dry twigs. Byron saw the branches and immediately knew who was behind it. He grunted toward the hall. He, don't be mad, came a voice behind them. Saul turned around again to see a tall, thin man walking down the stairs. He was over 2 meters tall, but as skinny as a bamboo pole. Byron glared coldly. Got it, the man replied with a smile. He bent over, hands on his knees, and grinned at Saul. Hello, you must be Saul. I'm the Black Castle warden from the tower. My name is Machi Machi. Saul hesitated. Was his name really Machi Machi, or was he just repeating it out of habit? Hello, Mr. Machi Machi. The man kept smiling, his eyebrows curving like parentheses. Don't be angry. I was just curious about who helped Byron become a third rank before turning 30. I was thinking if the tower kicked him out, maybe I'd reluctantly let him help me guard the door. Just got lucky, Saul answered modestly. Machi Machi looked even more delighted. Oh, I like you, little one. You're so skinny, good-looking, just like me. My mentor is Mentor Ans. Is he yours too? I'm under Mentor Kaz. Oh, Kaz is good too, just a bit boring. Byron, I mean, I'm the one who lacks composure, haha, not composed at all. I'll take Saul to his room. You can go, Byron said, no longer wanting to waste time. Seeing that Saul had come alone, full of questions, he didn't want to let Machi Machi ramble on. Sure. Machi Machi stepped to the side and opened up the hallway, smiling as he watched the two head upstairs. Byron led Saul up the right staircase to the second floor and brought him to a narrow room shaped like a coffin. Why'd you come here alone? Where, Nick? Saul quickly gave a brief rundown of what happened in Grind Sale Town. Byron's expression darkened as he listened. He opened his mouth, revealing sharp teeth. Saul, remember this. No matter who takes the task, if you haven't seen the actual task details yourself, you are not to complete it for them. Saul was stunned. Was there something more to this task? Think about it. Grinding sound fruit calms the mind. If someone inside the tower needed it, who do you think that would be? Saul froze for a second, then realized. Nick, but if he needed the fruit, why didn't he go himself? That's the issue. His task was simply to visit the town and convey the tower's stance. But he claimed he also had a secret task, to investigate the fruit's decline in yield. But do you know for sure that such a secret task even exists? All you have is a scolding letter from Mentor Rum, right? Saul's face grew grim. And even if he asked you to find out the cause, did he say you had to solve it? What if you found out who was behind it? Then what? How would you deal with them? You don't even know because you weren't the one assigned the mission. Saul realized just how careless he'd been. Since his first aptitude test, when he caught the eye of several mentors, he hadn't received special treatment. Per se, but danger in everyday life had certainly decreased. Even his diary rarely warned him of death anymore. Despite constantly reminding himself to stay alert, his vigilance had definitely slipped a bit. Senior, are you saying Nick deliberately sent me to Grind Sale Town? But why? What would he gain? He asked aloud, but was really asking himself. Were there any powerful enemies in Grind Sale Town? Even if someone wanted to use the barbarians to kill him, it didn't seem likely. Saul might not win, but he could definitely escape. Did Nick know what was going on in the town? As Saul pondered, Byron casually muttered, "When Nick gets here, we'll ask him." Saul looked up in surprise, then chuckled, "Right, we'll ask him first." Crossing his arms, Saul added, "If I hadn't suddenly advanced to second rank, those red-skinned barbarians really would have been a problem. Nick definitely owes me extra compensation." Byron Byron gave Saul a second look, only now realizing that his first-rank assistant had upgraded on his own. The reward he'd planned for Saul might have been a little too low. Chapter 114: The Burial Grounds of Wizards. Nick arrived at Black Castle that very night. The moment he stepped inside, before he even had a chance to greet Machi Machi, he was pulled into a small dark room by Byron and Saul. "Nick, the task you assigned Saul to investigate Grindsail Town, was there any written mission order?" Byron got straight to the point. Nick lowered his eyes at the question and raised both hands in a quick, surrendering gesture. "There wasn't," he said solemnly. "I admit the covert investigation was something I personally asked Saul to do." "Your reason?" Saul stepped forward. Nick pressed his lips together. "Recently, it's become harder and harder to request grinding sound fruit from the tower. I asked around and was told it's because the tribute supply itself has been declining. I originally took this chance to leave the tower under Mentor Rum's official mission to visit Grindsail Town, hoping to privately secure some grinding sound fruit. But something came up halfway, and I had to leave. So I asked Saul to help figure out the reason behind the shortage." He looked up at Saul. "It was a last-minute decision, sorry, but I'll make sure to pay you extra. Did you find out the reason?" Saul exchanged a glance with Byron, then shared some of the truth. "A wizard in Grindsail Town has been refining vengeful spirits in an attempt to ascend. Some of the grinding sound fruit is probably being used to help him stay sane." "Some of it," Nick immediately caught the wording. "The townsfolk are also trading grinding sound fruit to barbarians in exchange for safety." Nick's previously expressionless face showed a hint of puzzlement. "Barbarians? Why would barbarians want grinding sound fruit?" "Do barbarians use grinding sound fruit to maintain sanity?" Saul countered. "No," Nick shook his head. "Barbarians thrive on madness. Even their priests rely on their own methods to remain lucid." "Then why would they want grinding sound fruit? Or were the barbarians just a cover?" As Saul furrowed his brow in thought, Nick lowered his gaze again and remained silent. Byron suddenly asked from the side, "What made you leave halfway?" Nick glanced at him but didn't hide the truth. "My father passed away. My family called me back to sign the waiver on my inheritance rights." It was a perfectly reasonable excuse and easy to verify, making it hard for Saul to conclude whether Nick left on purpose. The room fell silent for a moment. Noticing the mood, Nick spread his hands. "I'm not grieving, no need to worry." Byron suddenly stood. "In that case, when we return to the tower, you'll transfer the appropriate payment to Saul." Nick immediately replied, "No problem, though one of the rewards isn't claimable by a first-rank apprentice. I can offer a substitute." "No need, Senior Nick," Saul raised his hand. "During the fight with the barbarians in Grindsail Town, I had no choice but to ascend to second rank." Nick opened his mouth, but the words got stuck in his throat. After a moment of silence, he placed a hand over his chest. "I'm not surprised." He paused, then pressed harder. "I'm not jealous." "Then it's settled," Byron finalized. "Pack up tonight. We head out for Hanging Hands Valley tomorrow." With that, he turned to leave, only to come back midway and escort both Saul and Nick out of the room. That night, Saul lay in his long, coffin-like room on a narrow bed barely wide enough to turn over, thinking about Nick's words from earlier. From what Nick said, the mission might truly have been a spontaneous decision. After all, his reason for leaving was quite solid. But when Saul mentioned the barbarian destruction of Grindsail Town's fields, Nick hadn't shown the concern one might expect. This reaction didn't quite match his apparent concern over the grinding sound fruit. Even if Nick was an extremely emotionally reserved person, his level of concern about the fruit seemed to shift too drastically. Was Nick trying to convey something through this grinding sound fruit incident? He closed his eyes, and faces flashed through his mind. The next morning, the three of them rose early and bade farewell to the warden of Black Castle. They didn't ride the cramped Wizard Tower carriage this time, but instead used the local Black Castle mode of travel, a wooden spider. When Saul saw the wooden spider, he thought he was looking at a giant RV with 8 legs. They were headed to Hanging Hands Valley, a place where multiple wizard factions once fought, a place where ordinary people dared not even approach. Wizards going there didn't bring servants. For such trips, large magical transportation tools like the wooden spider were most commonly used. Though you still had to be careful driving it, damaging one of these things would be painfully expensive. Saul hauled down his full set of soul research tools from the carriage. Nick brought a bundle of straps from an inductive chair and some metal rings. Byron had a collection of strange components and a few special flasks, soul flasks used to store malevolent spirits. To physical bodies, soul flasks were fragile, but to spirits they were near unbreakable. Any ordinary wraith or vengeful spirit caught inside would find escape nearly impossible. This mission, Saul and Nick were tagging along to help Byron capture Wraith. And while they were at it, maybe do a bit of personal research too. The three of them seemed to have forgotten the previous night's small disagreement and were working together in harmony. Hanging Hands Valley, once a battlefield of wizards, now their burial ground. The reason for the war was long lost to time, but it was known that so many wizards died in that war that the western region of the northern continent was nearly purged of wizard factions. For a while, you couldn't even find a single second-rank wizard in the western region. But that vacuum didn't last long. Factions from the eastern region of northern continent and even the southern continent quickly set their eyes on the area. After a wave of overt and covert struggle, new wizard forces settled in the west. Among them was Gorse's Wizard Tower, which was strongest. As a result, the tower's wizards held significant power over the entire western wizarding world. So long as they didn't court death, Saul and the others could basically walk around the region with impunity. Inside the wooden spider, the three steadily approached the entrance of Hanging Hands Valley. Hanging Hands Valley also happens to be the entry point to the western region's wastelands. Since the war here, that passage into the unclaimed territory has been sealed, Byron said as he pointed out the destination. The Wastelands. Saul had heard of the name in his omniscience class, though only in passing. Yeah, even official wizards have to be extremely cautious there, Nick added. I've only ever heard vague mentions. Better not go there anyway, Byron said, closing the topic. The wooden spider finally reached the edge of Hanging Hands Valley and began its descent. Saul couldn't imagine what the valley once looked like, but its entrance now resembled a massive, steep slide. Chunks of loose rock cascaded like a waterfall down from the plateau where they stood. The slope was nearly 70 degrees, like a person collapsed against a wall, their arms dangling limply. On such a slope, a regular carriage would be useless, but the 8-legged wooden spider could climb up and down like a real spider. Its cabin could even auto-adjust to stay level, ensuring the passengers didn't get thrown around. As it steadily descended, Saul saw a valley nestled between two towering peaks. A gust of wind blew through, carrying the long-faded scent of blood. The temperature in the cabin dropped as they went lower. Saul instinctively tugged at his sleeves. No need to be nervous, Nick reassured him. The deep interior is where the real battle took place. We'll only be capturing spirits at the outskirts, nothing too dangerous. Byron, looking out the window for a suitable campsite, nodded in agreement. Saul, however, stole a glance at his journal. The moment they entered the valley, he'd felt a tingling all over his body, as if countless unseen eyes were watching him. Must be, he tugged at his collar, trying to breathe easier. Just my imagination, right? Chapter 115, A Mountain Full of. After the wooden spider descended to the bottom of the steep, rocky slope, Byron, under his own direction, set up several tents a short distance from the base of the mountain. If all went according to plan, they would be spending at least the next month, possibly even longer here. Once the tents were swiftly pitched, Byron called on Saul to begin assembling the experimental equipment. To catch Wraith, they first had to determine their approximate location. What Byron was now setting up was a soul wave detection instrument, brought from the Wizard Tower. Saul had never seen, let alone used, such a device, so all he could do was hand over materials and help from the side. Since it didn't require any thinking, Saul handed things over while taking in the surroundings. "Senior Byron, why are there so many holes in the ground here and at the base of the mountain? Some of them look like they were dug by people." "That's right. The actual ground level here used to be far lower. Legend has it that a third-rank wizard once moved half a mountain here, burying all the enemy's reinforcements underneath it." Half a mountain? Saul was stunned. He couldn't begin to imagine what kind of mental and magical power it would take to lift a whole mountain. His current mage's hand could barely lift a chair. Some of the wizards buried under the mountain didn't die. They dug tunnels to escape upward, but even those who made it to the surface mostly didn't survive. Later, treasure hunters came looking for valuable materials. Over time, this whole place was dug into a mess of holes. Saul glanced at a nearby tunnel barely 10 centimeters in diameter. He couldn't imagine what kind of person could crawl out or treasure hunt through that. At that moment, Nick returned from scouting. "I did a preliminary check. There's almost no spiritual presence around here. If we want to catch any wraith, we'll need to go deeper in." Byron brushed the dust off his hands and asked, "How much deeper?" Nick Whoosh unfolded a map. The map hovered in the air on its own, needing no table to support it. Saul leaned over as well. The map depicted the area around the steep slope at the entrance of Hanging Hands Valley. "Are we going to search around here? Are we splitting up or working together?" Byron and Nick both turned their heads to look at Saul. "What?" he asked. "I'll search with Nick. You stay and watch over the equipment," Byron said first. Nick chimed in as well. "You've only just reached second rank and you're not yet proficient in your spells. Better to stay here and review your knowledge." All right. Saul had hoped that his promotion might earn him more involvement in the expedition. At that moment, Byron finished setting up the detection device. "That should do it. It's portable now, too." "Have others tried capturing wraith here before?" Saul looked at the mirror-like surface at the center of the instrument and stepped closer to examine it. The mirror didn't seem flat. It reflected a distorted image of Saul's face. Seeing Saul's interest, Byron explained, "The surface isn't flat, so people always appear twisted in it. But once the device is activated, any clear human figure you see reflected is a spiritual entity." "Can I try it?" Saul curiously touched the mirror. Strangely enough, the mirror felt perfectly smooth. Could the unevenness be due to the silver coating on the inside? Byron gave him a short demo. "This part adjusts the wavelength. You can try it out yourself later, but don't go past this threshold." Saul looked down at the red-marked scale. "What happens if I go past it?" Nick, folding away the map, made a blooming motion with his hands in front of Saul's face. "You might end up seeing something you shouldn't. Could be good, could be bad." Wizards were nothing if not efficient. Byron and Nick quickly decided on a direction for their search and left the temporary base. Once they were gone, Saul didn't idle. Having just been promoted to second rank and absorbed so many soul fragments that couldn't be stored long but could stimulate soul resin to increase mana, he still didn't know exactly how much his mana had increased. With all kinds of instruments readily available at the temporary base, Saul seized the rare opportunity to run a full-body scan. The results were full of pleasant surprises. His mana had shot up to 53 joules. Mental power couldn't be measured in exact numbers, but Saul could faintly sense that it had grown denser, more refined. That Shelley wizard must have spent years gathering all those vengeful spirits, and in the end, they were wasted on someone who didn't even know how to use them. Ultimately, it all ended up benefiting Saul. But to ask Saul to imitate Sherry and start creating his own vengeful spirits, not a chance. Even if those fragments provided tremendous growth, the impurities within them could bring terrifying consequences. Just look at Soniel, for example. After the scan confirmed that his body hadn't suffered any adverse effects from the promotion, Saul let out a satisfied breath. If a promotion resulted in minor injuries or contamination of body or mind, it could still be remedied. But Saul had no desire to mess himself up on his very first advancement. Setting aside the black crystal, Saul once again confirmed that he was alone, then pulled out a small silver sphere from his chest pocket. It was no more than half a centimeter in diameter, occasionally flickering with starlight inside. This was the nightmare butterfly cocoon Saul had extracted from Penny's eye. What he had retrieved were two silver hemispheres. But once held in his palm, the two hemispheres fused into a seamless sphere, and no amount of force could separate them again. Saul had never heard of a nightmare butterfly before. After reuniting with Byron, he'd combed through every book he had on butterflies, but there wasn't a single mention of it. Clearly, this wasn't something a first-rank apprentice should know about. And yet, Saul was deeply curious about Penny's ability to enter other people's dreams. I wonder how to activate this cocoon. Maybe it'll let me enter dreams too. He gently tapped the silver cocoon with his fingertip, while jotting down ideas on paper with his other hand. Swish, swish, swish. 1. The simplest method: sleep while holding the cocoon. Start with a few ordinary people nearby to ensure experiment safety. 2. Embed it in the eye, then sleep. Replicating Penny's method, though a steep cost, restorative magic for eyes isn't cheap. But if I get rich, maybe worth a shot. 3. Meditate and synchronize mental energy with the cocoon. Try activating its powers that way. Tab, tab, tab. Saul suddenly stopped writing and straightened up. He thought he heard something. Resting a hand on the table just as he was about to stand, a shadow darted past underneath. Saul looked down, and his eyes widened in disbelief. A head with 2 feet, was waddling out from beneath his table. It was the head of a middle-aged man, humming idly to himself. The head had no body, just a pair of legs attached to the neck. The ankles were stubby, making the gait resemble that of a penguin or maybe a duck. It might have been funny if the face weren't so deeply unsettling. Before Saul could react, he heard another voice. There you go slacking again. Another head emerged from under the tent flap. This one was a middle-aged woman, with chestnut hair dragging on the ground, stirring up pebbles. She didn't seem to notice, her focus entirely on chasing the male head. Lord Morden is organizing the ranks. We're about to depart. But the man-head ignored her and waddled off through the far side of the tent. The woman-head followed him out. Neither of them spared so much as a glance at Saul. Byron had never mentioned anything like this when he briefed him on Hanging Hands Valley. A faint unease crept into Saul's heart. He stepped to the front of the tent and yanked the flap open. And then his skin erupted in goosebumps, from the soles of his feet to the roots of his hair. Outside the tent, across the hills and fields, was a swarm of creatures. A mountain full of bizarre monsters. Each one was just a head, a human head with 2 legs. Chapter 116. You did plug it in. What exactly are those head monsters? Saul had always thought he'd read plenty of books these past 2 years, but the unknown was always greater than the known. And in the wizarding world, the unknown usually meant danger. Because he had absolutely no idea what kind of creature he was dealing with, Saul wanted to retreat into the tent and wait for Byron and Nick to return. But when he looked up, he saw several head monsters had somehow climbed up onto their lab bench. One of them even had the back of its head pressed right up against the soul wave detector. The device was knocked askew and nearly fell to the ground. But the head monster that bumped into it had absolutely no idea it had almost caused a disaster. It just bounced in place again. Saul couldn't take it anymore and hurried to step forward to save the detector. But the moment he moved his left foot, the diary suddenly flew out and hovered in front of his face. April 14th, year 316 of a lunar calendar. Even with only a head remaining, head monsters will never stop their pursuit of knowledge. They are forever immersed in their quest for truth. But if a head monster realizes you can see them, they'll enthusiastically recruit a like-minded soul. So what do you think? Though you might end up a little shorter. That's just because all the nutrients went to the brain. Saul shut his mouth without a word and prepared to put his foot back down. But as soon as his foot touched the ground, something felt off. Feigning casualness, he glanced down, only to find that he was stepping on the hair of that woman's head from earlier. She had been clumsily running along, but now, caught by her own hair, the force flipped her backward, rolling her head right to Saul's ankle. "Oh, some big dumb guy stepped on my hair." Saul's heart dropped. Just then, a row of head monsters strolled past him. They didn't help the woman head monster. Instead, they laughed at her. "Been telling you that hair's a hassle. Just eat it already. Bald supremacy. Or eat his foot instead. Let's just hope his foot doesn't smell worse than your mouth." The woman's eyes darted in all directions. Saul had the distinct impression she was starting to be convinced. "Ah," Saul said flatly, "my foot's suddenly so itchy." He nervously lifted his left foot and, putting on a show, scratched it through the sole of his shoe. The woman head monster used the moment to back away and freed her hair. I need to go wash my hair," she cried, distraught, and ran off. But honestly, her hair had more mud on it than the bottom of Saul's shoe. Confirming there were no more heads underfoot, Saul carefully set his foot back down. But before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, he heard a loud crack. Saul looked up, only to see the soul wave detector had nearly been knocked off the table. Its base had already slid halfway off the edge. Saul took a deep breath. He squared his shoulders and stepped forward, muttering to himself, "This detector doesn't look that complicated. I'll try operating it myself." He carefully approached and caught the waist-high device just before it could fall. He'd originally wanted to take it back to the tent, but when he turned around, he found himself surrounded. At some point, a crowd of head monsters had gathered. Each of them craned their necks with great effort, staring at Saul as if hoping he could see them too. If Saul wanted to return to the tent now, he'd either have to step on some heads or make it obvious he was avoiding them. Either way, it would give him away. Saul shifted the detector in his arms and said under his breath, "This thing is heavy, forget it, I don't want to break it. I'll just try it here." He made a show of slowly lowering the detector to the ground. Because he moved deliberately, the head monsters in front of him saw the device coming down and quickly scooted out of the way. Saul spotted a clear patch and finally set the detector down safely. Now, even if they knocked it over again, it shouldn't break. To follow through on his earlier act, Saul began to turn it on using the method Byron had taught him. It was his first time using it, and although Byron had shown him once, Saul still fumbled through the steps, especially with a group of supposedly invisible onlookers crowding around. "He's so dumb. He's a wizard. He's a wizard apprentice. If my apprentice were this dumb, I'd eat his brain." As if you'd ever get an apprentice. Saul tried his best to tune out the taunting, but whether it was nerves or just poor memory, no matter how long he fiddled with it, the detector wouldn't turn on. Forget it, Saul slumped back, one hand landing on a head then sliding down to the ground. I must just be too stupid. He thought a new wave of ridicule was coming, but the air around him fell completely silent. He snuck a glance at the floor. The head monsters were still there, but they were silent, like their mouths had all been stuffed with sweaty socks. Saul blinked slowly, his gaze drifting toward the mirror. There in the mirror was a warped reflection of himself. And standing behind that warped version of himself was a person, someone whose features were too blurred to make out. But unlike the twisted, ghostly shapes he'd seen before, this figure was perfectly proportioned. Saul's whole body went cold. He stopped breathing. A spirit. No, not just any spirit. And Wraith. So Byron's target had walked right up to him. But now Saul was all alone. He tried to mobilize his mental power to cast a spell, but he couldn't move. Even his spiritual form was sluggish, like lava. It had none of the vitality it used to. This wraith, it sealed my movement. Even his thoughts had slowed. With his consciousness stiff and dull, he couldn't even feel afraid, just frozen. He stared into the mirror at the wraith, unable to look away. Saul almost wished he were in a life-or-death situation. Then the diary might fly out, and he could shift his gaze to it and break the wraith's control. But the diary didn't move. Even little Algie was still. Clearly, wraiths weren't on the menu. Saul had no idea what the figure in the mirror wanted. It just stared at him. And slowly, the blurred figure became clearer, like fog dissipating across the mirror's surface. Saul could almost make out its eyes. Suddenly, a hand landed on Saul's shoulder. Hug! Saul jolted violently, and finally he could move again. He instinctively turned toward the voice, and saw Byron crouching beside him, looking at him with concern. Hug! Byron, Saul said shakily, I just saw a wraith. He didn't dare mention the head monsters, but when he glanced back down, all the heads were gone. At some point, they had completely disappeared. You saw in Wraith, through the detector, Nick walked over from behind Byron. Arms full of large rocks. No way. He dumped the rocks, looking confused as he walked to the side of the device to inspect it. You never even turned it on. What? Saul was stunned. He pointed to the mirror. Look. The words caught in his throat. In the mirror, there was only the warped reflection of himself, and the warped reflection of Byron, crouching beside him. Chapter 117, The Vanished Cocoon. The incident with the wraith was a bit strange. Logically speaking, a soul wave detector that hasn't been activated is just an ordinary mirror. It shouldn't have been able to reveal a wraith. But Byron and Nick didn't think Saul had just seen things either. After all, whether what Saul saw was a hallucination or not, the result could only go one of two ways. Either the wraith existed, or it didn't. This is the entrance to Hanging Hands Valley. It's impossible for a truly powerful wraith to be here, Nick said as he activated the soul wave detector and checked the surroundings again. Nothing, no sign of any spiritual entity. But Saul, why did you put the detector on the ground? Nick looked up, puzzled. His lips twitched slightly. Was it because you're too short to reach the table? Saul immediately turned to glare at Byron, only to be met with his calm expression and innocent eyes. Saul's gaze shifted to Byron's throat. He swore. It definitely cracked open just now. But height wasn't an issue he could deal with right now, even if he firmly believed he'd reach 180 centimeters eventually. Anyway, Saul returned to the main topic. He glanced around again, making sure there were no head monsters left nearby, and then whispered to the two, "Just now, I saw a lot of monsters that were just heads with two legs, but they vanished before you guys came back." Lowering his voice even more, he asked, "I didn't dare provoke them. Do you know what kind of monsters those are?" He looked up, just in time to see Byron's face twitch slightly. Meanwhile, Nick's pupils contracted sharply, clear fear flashing in his eyes. Smack! Nick suddenly slapped himself across the face, then looked up with a slightly twisted expression. "Those monsters, they're all gone now." Seeing Nick's reaction, Saul nodded quickly. "They're all gone, otherwise I wouldn't have dared to even mention it." "I need a moment alone," Nick muttered and slipped into his tent. Not long after, muffled moaning could be heard from inside, like someone trying to hold back sobs with their hands over their mouth. Byron held it together better. His throat split slightly as he spoke. "Good thing you didn't startle them. Those are head monsters. Normally, you'd only see them deeper inside Hanging Hands Valley." Nodding the confusion in Saul's eyes, Byron sighed. "I didn't tell you about them earlier because the more people know they exist, the more likely they are to encounter them. But you still ran into them. If you had drawn their attention, they might have turned you into a head monster too, and you would have forgotten you were ever a normal person." So that's why Byron and Nick hadn't mentioned such dangerous creatures at all. "How many of them did you see?" "The place was covered with them." Byron inhaled sharply, then stood up and called out at Nick's tent, "Nick, hurry up and get a hold of yourself. We need to leave this place now." A vague sound came from inside in response. Byron returned and said to Saul, "No need to dismantle the instruments. Just move them onto the crawler. We're relocating." Afraid the head monsters might return at any moment, Byron and Saul only grabbed the most essential things and gave up on the tents altogether. Besides some books, Saul hadn't brought much anyway, but just as he picked up his backpack and stepped outside, he froze. Where was the nightmare butterfly's cocoon? It was while observing that silver orb-like cocoon that he'd first seen the head monsters. After that, everything had been so tense that he hadn't thought about the cocoon at all. Now, looking back, he couldn't remember whether he had put it away or not. He quickly searched all his pockets, even got on the ground to look around, but the silver orb was nowhere to be found. No way, it just vanished. Could one of the head monsters have picked it up? Saul sat down, closed his eyes and focused. "No, I distinctly remember the moment I saw the head monsters. I stopped feeling anything in my hand. That's why I didn't realize the cocoon was missing until later." He mimed holding something in his hand and slowly opened his eyes. Right, it vanished in an instant. Now that he was a formal apprentice, his memory had been enhanced by his mental body. He wouldn't make the kind of silly mistake where he forgot where he put something moments ago. He could even recall minute actions if he concentrated. So Saul was certain he hadn't simply misplaced the cocoon. It had vanished in the blink of an eye. And in that moment, he hadn't noticed at all, not until afterward when things had calmed down. "So?" It was Byron calling from outside. Saul cast one last unwilling glance at the tent. Did it escape on its own, or was it stolen by something else? Damn it, I didn't even get to study it yet. But this place was no longer safe. Even a third-rank apprentice like Byron was on edge. Saul couldn't afford to be careless. He hurried out of the tent, his heart filled with regret. By then, Nick had finally recovered from his emotional spiral and returned to the crawler with his gear. His hands were covered in bruises. It wasn't clear if he'd pinched himself too hard. Saul already knew that because Nick studied emotion-related wizardry, he often suppressed his own emotional responses. But if he ever couldn't hold it back, whether laughing or panicking, it would result in extreme outbursts. Like laughing until he passed out, or being so scared he vomited. This side effect was actually quite dangerous. In normal situations it was manageable, but if a crisis struck and he couldn't stay calm, it could become life-threatening. Saul suspected this might even be one of the reasons why Nick hadn't been able to advance to third rank yet. The wooden spider rumbled to life and quickly left the now unsafe campsite. As it climbed the slope, Saul glanced back through the rear window and saw a vague crowd of heads at the base of the mountain. He averted his eyes and pretended he hadn't seen anything. Right in front of him was the Soulwave detector's mirror. Because they were in a rush, they hadn't disassembled the device, just lifted it whole onto the wooden spider. That made the once roomy cabin feel cramped, forcing the three of them to sit against the walls. The moment Saul saw the mirror, the memory of the dark figure that had appeared in it came flooding back. A wave of discomfort settled in his chest, and he turned his head to avoid it. But as he shifted his gaze away, he seemed to catch a glimpse of silver light. He quickly turned back. In the mirror was his own warped, blurry face, no trace of silver. Did I imagine it? He leaned closer, and his twisted reflection grew clearer. Still nothing unusual. But as he was about to pull back, he noticed something strange. His left eye shimmered. Saul froze, then glanced around at the others. Because the detector was in the way, the other two couldn't see his face. Only then did Saul narrow his eyes and slip into a semi-immersive meditative state. This time he finally saw it. Inside his left eye there it was, a silver orb covered in starlight gleaming brilliantly. Saul resisted the urge to rub his eyes and slowly lowered his head. The nightmare butterfly's cocoon, it had moved into his eye on its own. Chapter 118. A Chance Encounter with a Third-Level Apprentice. Although his eye had just been mysteriously invaded by a cocoon, Saul wasn't panicking, at least not yet. Penny had worn this cocoon for 3 or 4 years without issue, and she was just an ordinary little girl. As a wizard apprentice, he had even less reason to fear it. Besides, as long as the diary didn't get involved, the situation wouldn't be considered a real problem. The only troublesome part was that he couldn't ask Byron for help right now. After all, there was no way to explain where this cocoon had come from. If not for the diary's warning, he wouldn't have noticed it at all. He'd have to wait a while before bringing the matter to light. His experiments on the nightmare butterfly cocoon were forced to move into a secondary phase, but that would have to wait until they returned to the tower. Saul relaxed slightly and leaned against the window. "Where are we heading?" "There's a mountain hollow if we go around here," Nick offered, speaking up from behind the perception device. "It's a bit deeper than our original location, but it shouldn't be too dangerous for us." "Are you sure we won't run into more of them over there?" Saul was a bit concerned. Their journey hadn't exactly gone smoothly so far. "Unlikely," Byron said in his deep voice. "I've been thinking, those things probably showed up at the entrance of Hanging Hands Valley because of a rare tidal storm." Seeing that Saul wasn't familiar with the term, Byron took the time to explain. Hanging Hands Valley was the burial ground of thousands of wizards and had essentially split into 2 worlds, one above ground and one below. The underground portion had become a tangled network of tunnels, thanks to the rescue efforts, escapes, and excavation projects of the past. Dangerous monsters like the man-headed beasts usually dwelled in the deeper parts of these tunnels. They rarely came out, since the stability of the surface world was actually detrimental to their existence. However, every so often, a few unpredictable storms would erupt from underground, pushing these monsters into other tunnel sections, or even all the way to the surface. When that happened, the general rule was simple: evacuate immediately. Once you were outside the storm-affected zone, it was much safer. Tidal storms were rare events, which was why the outskirts of Hanging Hands Valley were still considered relatively safe for wizard apprentices. None of the 3 had any intention of withdrawing. If just this bit of danger made them retreat, then there was no point in pursuing the path of wizardry at all. They bypassed a stretch of scattered boulders, each 3 or 4 meters high, when Byron suddenly ordered the wooden spider to stop. Had they arrived? Saul noticed Byron climbing down from the spider, so he followed suit. The moment his feet touched the ground, he realized why. They weren't alone. There were several people ahead. 2 groups by the looks of it. One group had 4 people, currently engaged in battle with someone on the opposing side. But with just a couple of glances, Saul saw that it was a one-sided slaughter. Those 4 were being toyed with and crushed. The other side only had 2 people. One of them, with long purple hair, was massacring the 4 with a casual, almost playful air. The other, who sat slouched on a large rock nearby, looked pale and lethargic. By now, 2 of the 4 victims had already fallen. Foam bubbled from their mouths, and their skin had started to dissolve. The pale-faced apprentice suddenly noticed Saul and the others. He leapt down from the rock and flew toward them. Saul instantly activated his mental projection, ready for battle. But then he realized that Byron hadn't entered a combat stance. Only Nick seemed tense, though his face still betrayed no emotion. The pale apprentice landed in front of Byron and suddenly broke into a smile. "Yo, Byron, long time no see." Byron nodded. "You're still as cold as ever, haha." The pale apprentice seemed good-natured and turned to greet Nick. "Nick, didn't expect to see you out here." Nick bowed respectfully. "Senior Wright." The pale-faced apprentice, Wright, finally looked at Saul, still smiling. "Haven't seen you before, little guy. Are you newly promoted to 2nd rank?" Saul bowed like Nick. "Senior Wright, hello. I just became 2nd rank not too long ago." Wright chuckled. "You look pretty young. These newcomers these days sure are something else. Might even surpass us old-timers and become true wizards first." Despite calling himself an old-timer, Wright looked quite young, possibly even younger than Byron, appearing to be in his early 20s. Of course, if a wizard apprentice had undergone physical modifications, their aging could be slowed. You couldn't judge age or strength by appearance alone. Once someone became a true wizard, their lifespan would increase dramatically, making it even more meaningless to rely on looks. While they were chatting, the purple-haired apprentice had already finished off the 4 opponents. He opened his mouth toward the corpses, releasing a cloud of purple mist that engulfed the bodies. After a few moments, the mist flowed back into his mouth, and the corpses were gone, leaving only a few piles of clothing behind. The purple-haired man walked over to collect the loot. Byron stared at the remains for a moment before speaking. "Those were people from the land drifters, weren't they?" Wright quickly raised his hands in innocence. "Not my fault. Those guys saw we only had 2 people and tried to ambush us. You know how Bill is. He always kills his enemies on the spot. Nothing I could do." Byron frowned. The land drifters usually move in groups. He's not afraid that killing a few will draw a crowd. Wright wasn't concerned. He laughed. "No big deal. If they come looking for revenge, we'll just throw Bill under the bus." At that moment, the purple-haired Bill finished looting, hands in his pockets as he strolled over. "Byron, Hanging Hands Valley sure is busy today. Everyone's here for treasure, huh? But why'd you bring 2 second ranks along to slow you down?" Byron's eyes flashed with a hint of caution. He knew that for the land drifters to attempt an ambush, it must have been a setup. Bill likely pretended to be weak to lure them in. The land drifters were a sizable wizard group. Their top-tier power wasn't on par with the tower, so they usually avoided conflict with tower apprentices. This was probably a case of Bill hiding his affiliation to bait the others. Now that the victims were dead, Byron couldn't really say anything. He just hoped it wouldn't lead to future trouble. "We're not here for treasure," Byron said evenly. "But this area doesn't really suit you either, does it?" "Heh, just short on cash." Right, and I came to scavenge some corpses. Bill shrugged, then suddenly turned to Nick. But you, Nick, what are you doing here? Didn't you get a letter from Mentor Rum to go visit Grindsail Town? What did you sneak off and plunder the Grinding Sound fruit while you were at it? Don't tell me there'll be none left for me next month when I go pick up the tribute. So Bill was the one who collected the Grinding Sound fruit from Grindsail Town every year. Saul's heart skipped a beat. Then, did he know about the town's dealings with the barbarians? Before dying, Sherry had said that the tower had never helped Grindsail Town. Was she referring to Bill? Nick lowered his head slightly, looking a bit nervous. No need to go next month, Senior. Grindsail Town was attacked by barbarians. The Grinding Sound fruit fields were all destroyed. Bill raised an eyebrow. These stray apprentices out here get more useless every year, getting ambushed by a bunch of barbarians. He chuckled. Well, whatever, saves me the trouble of going every year. He slung an arm around Nick's shoulders. But now you're out of Grinding Sound fruit, huh, Tusk? I've always said emotions should be self-controlled, can't rely on potions. Nick bent under the pressure, but could only nod in agreement. If there's nothing else, we'll be on our way. Byron pulled Nick out from under Bill's arm. Wright looked curious. You're heading deeper with 2 second ranks. Byron was honest. Saul saw several head monster near the entrance. I suspect a tidal storm. It might actually be safer inside. Head monster, Wright's expression grew serious. Every time those things show up, people mysteriously disappear. Let's hope it's not us this time. But Bill's attention was elsewhere. He tilted his head, peering past Nick and Byron to look at Saul, who had been quietly standing behind them the whole time. So you're Saul, Bill said, eyes narrowing, his entire demeanor suddenly dangerous. I hear about you all the time. Quite the impressive junior, aren't you? Who keeps talking to Bill about him? Chapter 119, A Mountain of Pale White. Saul hadn't figured it out yet when Bill walked back to Byron. For some reason, Bill suddenly took an interest in Byron's mission and proposed to join him. At first, Saul suspected it might be because of himself. But after those 2 brief exchanges, Bill never initiated a conversation with Saul again, making Saul feel like he might have been overthinking it. Byron was initially hesitant about Bill's suggestion. But considering the recent strangeness in Hanging Hands Valley and the seeming instability even at the outskirts, he agreed. After all, with 3 third-rank apprentices moving together, as long as they didn't fight among themselves, they could basically sweep through the outskirts of Hanging Hands Valley unhindered. Our mission is to capture a wraith. Byron first stated the objective clearly. You go catch the wraith, we'll scavenge the corpses. Works out fine. Might even find some relics in the tunnels. Bill raised a brow, acting all cooperative. Having 2 more third-rank apprentices in the team was definitely beneficial for Saul and their wraith-hunting mission. Before leaving, Bill casually tossed the 4 people he had just killed into a ground hole. That took care of the corpses. The group continued deeper into Hanging Valley. The wooden spiders had to squeeze through tighter spaces now. Thankfully, there were no fat people among these apprentice witches. As they moved forward, the number of ground holes steadily increased. Some of these holes were as thin as an arm, others 3 to 4 meters in diameter. Most of them were so deep they couldn't see the bottom. While driving the wooden spiders, they had to be careful not to let the spider legs get stuck in the holes. A lot of these holes were dug by wizards during exploration. Since there was no overall planning, they just drilled wherever they liked. The underground is a chaotic web. It's easy to get lost, Byron explained while carefully maneuvering the spider, chatting with Saul. At the same time, he was warning the not-so-familiar Bill and his companion not to wander off. After about an hour, Nick would occasionally activate the soul wave detector to check for any signs of wraith activity. but perhaps because they were still at the outer edge of the valley, or maybe wraiths were less active during the day, the soul wave detector didn't show much. Is this thing even working? Bill curled his finger and knocked on the mirror of the soul wave detector device a couple of times. Byron had just furrowed his brow when Nick suddenly shouted, "I detected wraith activity." Saul leaned over for a look, and sure enough, he could see a faint shadow on the mirror. What confirmed it as a wraith and not a regular reflection was the figure's shape. It was a perfectly smooth humanoid silhouette, without the distortions typical of other mirror reflections. But this shadow was different from the one Saul had seen alone before. The one he had seen earlier, although also lacking facial features, had appeared very close to the mirror, as if it were standing right behind him. Its color had been dark gray, nearly black, unlike this one which was pale and faint, like a wisp of smoke that could dissipate at any moment. Byron slowed the spider and glanced at the mirror. Yep, definitely a wraith, but it's so faint it must have passed through a day or two ago. Bill perked up. A day or two, could it have crawled up from underground? Wright, sitting on the far side of the mirror and seeing nothing, still joined in. "Bill, your fingers really work wonders. Wanna knock it again?" Saul was startled, afraid Bill would actually mess with the device again. If this thing got thrown off, recalibrating it would be a huge pain. Luckily, once Bill heard there were wraith traces, his attention shifted. Before the wooden spider even came to a full stop, he jumped out the window. "Well then, what are we waiting for? Let's find a tunnel and head down." But Byron didn't respond. Instead, he stopped at a relatively flat area near the cliff edge. This would be their temporary base. Saul helped Nick carry the detector down and set it up, then clapped his hands and looked around. Compared to their original base, this area had way more tunnels. It felt like they were standing on a massive block of cheese. Tunnels honeycombed the ground, and even the nearby cliff was dotted with holes leading who knew where. After setting up camp, Byron started assigning tasks. "I suggest we each search separately for caves with signs of corruption. Afterward, we'll gather and compare our findings to pick the most promising one." But Bill immediately objected. "Wright and I aren't good at detecting wraiths. With your method, we might walk right past key clues without realizing it. I say we all just pick a tunnel and go straight down. If we go deep enough, we're bound to run into a wraith." Byron looked concerned. "If we go too deep, we might run into something we can't handle." Nick and Saul were both second-rank apprentices, especially Saul, who only knew a single first-tier spells. He barely had any means to protect himself. "If we can't handle it, we run," Bill said casually. "Byron, you're way too cautious. That's why it's taken you so long to reach third rank." Whether intentional or not, Bill slapped a hand on Saul's shoulder. "If you want to be a wizard, you can't be afraid of danger." Saul had seen how Bill used that purple mist to melt corpses. Now being touched by him made Saul uncomfortable. But the diary remained silent, which meant Bill hadn't tampered with him, at least not yet, and it was unlikely Bill would make a move on him in front of Byron. After thinking it through, Byron finally agreed with Bill's suggestion. "You do have a point. Let's stick together and head straight underground, but someone still needs to stay behind and monitor the soul wave detector. Nick and Saul can take turns." Taking the opportunity to assign Saul this task, Byron pulled him aside. "There's still something strange about what happened earlier. Tidal storms, even when they occur, rarely reach the entrance of Hanging Hands Valley, so I plan to finish this mission quickly and leave as soon as we can." Saul nodded. "Of course, if we come across a suitable wraith, we'll help you capture it, but there might not be time for thorough research." Finding a more intact wraith had always just been a bonus. Since the situation was getting odd, Saul wasn't going to push his luck. Besides, just completing this mission would earn him a lot of academic credits. Saul wasn't greedy. I'll figure it out myself. Don't worry about the wraith. Saul thought to himself, worst case, he'd have Nick smash the spirit again to enhance his hands. It'd just be a bit wasteful. Once the new plan was settled, it was already afternoon. But no one wanted to waste the day, so they ate a quick meal and set out. Nick would stay at the camp today. Wright crossed his arms, staring at the dense maze of tunnels before them, his pale face looking conflicted. Which tunnel do we go into? Bill clapped his hands. Doesn't matter. Let's take the closest one. He pointed at a hole just 5 meters away, nearly 2 meters in diameter. Byron, however, chose another one, about 3 meters wide, with signs of recent activity around it. Let's go with one that's already been explored a bit. Bigger space makes it easier for the group to move. Saul didn't immediately join the debate. He remembered Byron's initial plan, tracking wraiths through signs of corruption, and a thought struck him. Observing corruption, wasn't that exactly his specialty? Saul half closed his eyes and visualized the human monster movement diagram. And the world before his eyes didn't change much. Could it be that there really weren't many wraiths on the valley's edge? Or maybe too many people had explored this area before, leaving everything too clean. It didn't look like a burial ground for wizards at all. There were dozens of large holes and even more smaller ones before him, but not a single one gave off a reaction. Saul was disappointed. He turned to end the visualization when suddenly his eyes caught the cliff behind them. There, on one side of the mountain wall, several caves were lined with strange white phantoms writhing just outside their entrances. Saul couldn't help but walk over for a closer look. Just as he tried to study them, the white phantoms suddenly stretched out, becoming thin, bony white hands. These hands were long like wooden rods, clustered like wild grass. They grew around the cliffside caves and waved endlessly. As Saul's gaze settled on them, they seemed to sense his attention and began to wave more vigorously, as if calling him over or crying out for help. Chapter 120, I Can Float Down. Soft, fragmented murmurs echoed in Saul's ears, but no matter how hard he listened, he couldn't make out their meaning. He unconsciously took another step forward, then quickly realized it was the corruption luring him in. Saul firmly shifted his gaze, weakening the corruption's effect, but the whispers in his ears suddenly grew louder. He looked up toward the cliff face. From every part of the cliff, regardless of whether there was a cave there or not, countless white arms stretched out, densely packed. Those arms constantly extended and retracted, waving with outstretched fingers, grotesque in shape. Saul furrowed his brow. Now he was certain these arms were reaching for help. Through them, he seemed to glimpse the countless corpses buried within the mountain, the once immensely powerful apprentice wizards and true wizards who, faced with even stronger and more bizarre entities, had still ended up buried, despairing and helpless. At that moment, Saul finally understood what a wizard's graveyard meant. He understood what it meant when people said the western region had become a vacuum of wizards. The brutality of it all had never been conveyed in Byron's few offhand remarks. And the dead now appearing along this cliff were likely only a tiny portion of the whole Hanging Hands Valley. Those arms couldn't speak. They could only flail desperately, trying to attract attention, yearning for redemption. But Saul was very aware that these arms weren't even fragments of souls. They were just polluted remnants of resentment, left behind by the dead under the radiation of sorcery. The longer he looked, the more it felt like he wasn't standing at the bottom of a valley looking up a steep cliff, but hovering in the air, coldly observing the helpless dead trapped beneath the earth. Saul shook his head. His mental body was starting to destabilize. Saul, Saul. Suddenly, someone called his name. Saul snapped out of it and saw the others all watching him. It was Nick who called him. What's wrong? They're about to head out. Looks like Byron, and the others had already picked an entrance. Saul rubbed his throbbing head and turned to the three upperclassmen. "There's something off about the caves on that cliff behind us." Byron, who knew Saul's abilities best, immediately returned and began carefully observing the cliff he'd initially overlooked. Wright glanced at Saul, then at the tranquil mountain and asked skeptically, "Weren't those wizard corpses supposed to be underground? Why are they off to the side now?" "Saul is very good at detecting spirits," Byron replied, pulling his gaze back. "I trust him." Bill chuckled, eyes narrowing. "That's not really my specialty, but if you guys can figure out which cave is more likely to hold spirits, we'll go with your call." Byron handed the decision over to Saul directly. "Saul, which cave shows the clearest signs of corruption?" Saul wanted to say the entire cliff was strange. Still, he focused once more on the caves before him, suppressing the restlessness of his mental body as he carefully looked for differences. Bill narrowed his eyes slightly, watching Saul's expression, seemingly deep in thought. Wright clapped softly and muttered, "Is he observing spirits? I heard that people with especially sensitive mental energy can detect lingering souls without instruments. Could Saul be one of them?" Byron didn't reply. His silence spoke volumes. Saul scanned several nearby caves and finally locked onto one. He raised his hand, pointing to a cave about 3 meters off the ground, its diameter just over a meter. "This one, the corruption is stronger here, more likely to contain a wraith." Though Wright still couldn't see anything, he let out a sincere sigh. "Saul, just now you looked exactly like my mentor inspecting Petri dishes." "Your mentor?" "Mentor Ans," Wright said with a complicated look, as if recalling something traumatic. "I'm good at fighting but terrible at experiments. The way Ans looked at my lab reports, it was terrifying." Bill burst out laughing. "Maybe if you spent less time with women, your brain would work better." Wright rolled his eyes. "I've never toyed with women. I always communicate very sincerely with them." Nick was still fiddling with the sensor in his hand but couldn't detect anything. He sighed. "Next time someone says a wizard with only mental talent and no magic talent is useless, I'm definitely bringing you up as a counterexample." Bill, always the most impatient, said, "If we've confirmed it, what are we waiting for? Let's move." Byron walked to Saul and patted his shoulder. "Stick close to me." The four of them bent down and entered the cave 3 meters off the ground, leaving Nick alone at the camp. As the last figure, Wright, disappeared into the cave, Nick remained rooted in place. His hands were tightly clasped, far from as calm as he looked on the surface. Because Bill and Wright were third-rank apprentices, Nick couldn't use a communication spell in front of them. "Saul," he whispered inwardly, "stay close to Byron." The cave Saul had chosen wasn't very spacious. Traveling within the mountain was even harder than he had imagined. After all, this wasn't a passage built for travel. Some parts were roomy, others so narrow Saul couldn't squeeze through. Whenever they hit a tight spot, Wright would step in. He specialized in earth magic and moved easily underground. After a short, gentle stretch along the mountain's side, the tunnel suddenly angled sharply downward. In steeper areas, Saul had to dig his hands deep into the soil to keep his balance. Their feet were surrounded by pitch darkness. It was impossible to tell how far the tunnel went. Bill, walking second, maintained a faint glow spell, but it only lit a few meters around them. Beyond that, even with Saul's vision, he could only make out vague shadows. After about half an hour, Wright suddenly stopped. "No good. Up ahead is a steep downward shaft, nearly vertical." He tossed a stone down. The stone clattered endlessly as it tumbled. "We'll have to fly down. Climbing would take way too long." "Fly," Bill's voice rang out. "No need to ask Saul. Byron, have you learned featherfall?" Byron's entire body jolted, then suddenly shriveled. His throat split open, I can float down. Before Saul could process what Byron meant by float, he saw the withered, skin-like figure's mouth suddenly stretch long. The lips opened and shut a few times. Then he inhaled sharply. HSSSSSS. In just a few seconds, he swelled up. His skin stretched to its limits, expanding and expanding until he looked like a humanoid balloon. Then he raised two swollen, hoof-like hands and tied a knot in his own mouth. Even Bill and Wright were stunned speechless. Byron ignored them, awkwardly shifting his bloated body. He waved his mouth at Saul. MMM. Strangely, Saul immediately understood what Byron meant. Senior, you want me to grab your mouth and float down with you? MMM. Wright was the first to break. He clutched his stomach, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. Byron, how did I never realize you were this funny, if I had your ability? Wright abruptly fell silent, stroking his chin, deep in thought. Bill gave the musing Wright a push. Since you've got a way down, get moving already. Wright didn't react in time and got shoved into the shaft. Judging by the sound, though, he didn't go into free fall. Bill glanced at Byron. If you can't carry Saul, I've got another way. Byron shook his head side to side. Bill smirked, said nothing more, and jumped in.